Welcome to the enchanting world of Bella Brown's historical Western romance. I'm delighted to share this journey with you today. Before we ride into the story, if you enjoy these narrations, please consider subscribing to this channel. It's a small gesture that makes a big difference, and your support makes it possible to continue bringing these heartfelt tales to listeners everywhere, completely free of charge. Now find yourself a comfortable spot, close your eyes if you wish, and allow your imagination to travel back to the American frontier, where adventure and romance await. This audiobook presentation features A Christmas to Cherish by Bella Brown, all rights reserved. Prologue. Outside, the snow fell in fat, sticky flakes, filling the window ledges with fluffy piles that rested against the window pane. Inside, the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, and the wood smoke melded with the scent of pine and spicy cinnamon. A huge fir tree in the corner of the room kissed the roof and looked resplendent, dressed in its tin stars and beaded ropes threaded through the branches, with clay dolls and paper doilies dotted across it. Candlelight danced over the piano keys as 10-year-old Amy Talbot finished the last chords of the carol. For just a moment, the silence seemed to drag before her father jumped to his feet and clapped enthusiastically. "Oh, my darling, that was wonderful." His blue eyes glistened, and he rushed to her, pulling her into one of the big hugs that she loved so much. "Did you really love it, Papa?" She leaned back, her face glowing with happiness. She'd been practicing for weeks to surprise him, only ever playing when he was at work so that he wouldn't know. "It was the best Christmas gift I ever did have. I shall treasure the memory of it for as long as I live." He squeezed her close and pressed his lips to her dark head. "You are so talented, Amy. Don't ever stop playing. Promise me?" "I promise." She rested her head on his shoulder and looked to where Betty, her mother, was watching them both. Amy's face dropped. "Mama, why are you crying?" Betty dabbed delicately at her cheeks, patted the air with a dismissive hand. "Don't mind me, Amy, these are happy tears." Amy walked over to where her mother sat, pressed her small hands to her mother's pink cheeks, and kissed her. "Is that better?" Betty laughed and hugged her daughter close. "I am so lucky to have such a wonderful daughter." "That's because I have wonderful parents. It would have been nice to have a sister or a brother, though, don't you think?" Amy asked, dividing her attention between them. "You always said you wanted a big family." Betty met her husband's eyes, and they exchanged a knowing smile. "I am blessed with everything that I have, my love, more blessed than many people are." Amy held her hand out to her father. "It's been my favorite Christmas day so far." Gordon knelt beside her, lifted Betty's hand, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Every day with my girls is my favorite." Amy saw the love between her parents and smiled. "It's not every day that we have decorations, Papa, or the candles and the ribbons. I would love it if we did, though." "I'm not sure Cook would agree with you," Gordon replied, and Betty chuckled. "Though Christmas is more than just eating a fine ham and giving presents. It's about family and celebrating what the good Lord has blessed us with for another year." Amy knew that Cook was happy at Christmas time, as she got to spend time off with her own family, as did everyone who worked for her father. She'd heard the people talking about how good it was to work for a man like Gordon Talbot. She also knew that the reason for the shadows in her father's eyes when he mentioned the word family was linked to his brother. She'd overheard the conversations between the adults, ones that she knew weren't meant for her ears. "Can we say a prayer for Uncle Rupert and Aunt Ida?" Amy said. "Maybe next year they would be able to come for Christmas, and then we will all be together like a real family." Gordon's eyes filled with emotion. He smiled and nodded. "We sure can, because if anyone deserves the Lord's light in his life, it is my brother." "Do you want to say the prayer, Amy?" Amy bent her head and closed her eyes and felt the warmth of love fill her. "Dear Lord, thank you for blessing us all on this day. Thank you for the food that filled our plates, and thank you for keeping us all safe. Thank you for the tree in our house. Please keep everyone who works for Papa warm tonight, and send your blessings to Uncle Rupert and Aunt Ida. Thank you, Lord, for the best Mama and Papa I could ever want. Bless this house, dear Lord, and everyone in it. Amen." She opened her eyes and blinked to see both her parents watching her warmly with tears in their eyes. Did I do it wrong? Gordon shook his head no, and she saw him swallow and cough to clear his throat, though when he spoke, his voice was husky. No, darling Amy, that was just about perfect. Merry Christmas, Papa. Merry Christmas, Mama. Betty Talbot wrapped an arm around her daughter, and she leaned into her husband's embrace, linking them as one. The best one yet. Merry Christmas, Amy. Chapter 1. Amy Talbot leaned her forehead on the window pane and sighed. The glass was cold on her skin. She could hear the howling wind scream just beyond it as it drove the heavy rain into rivulets down the glass. The storm has been raging all day, which meant that she hadn't been allowed out. Gray clouds occluded the daylight, giving the world beyond their wide front garden an eerie light. Normally, she would watch for Papa through this window as she waited for him to come home from work, and she could see the road and the carriages that went along the street beyond. Today, she could barely see the trees in the garden where they were buffeted against the wind. Her breath misted onto the glass. She blew out some more, spreading the cloud around, and then wrote her name into the moisture. She knew the housekeeper, Mrs. Maynard, would tut at her and make her polish the glass when she saw what she'd done, but it would at least give her something to do. It felt like she'd been waiting on her parents to return all day, though if she bothered the housekeeper once more, she'd no doubt find her another menial task to keep her occupied, and she wasn't that bored. She used the forearm to sweep the writing away, and as she did, she saw the murky figure that leaned into the wind as he ran along the path and up to the steps. Amy frowned, and then she heard the knock at the door. By the time she crossed the room and had opened the drawing room door, Mrs. Maynard has ushered the poor wretch inside, and he was apologizing profusely for dripping on the floor. It's no bother, Joseph. Amy, go on back into the drawing room. Practice your piano. I'm waiting on Mama and Papa to come home, Mrs. Maynard. I was wondering who was at the door. Mrs. Maynard shooed her back into the room and caught hold of the door handle. I know, dear, and I know that you've been waiting for a while. I'm sure it won't be too much longer. Then we'll be having supper. I'll come to get you shortly, and you can help me set up the table if you like. Amy stepped back as the housekeeper closed the door. Then she pressed her ear to the door to listen, and she heard the housekeeper's voice muffled through the wood. Come through to the kitchen, Joseph. Let's get you dried off. What are you doing out on a night like tonight? His reply was inaudible, and Amy sighed as she tried to ignore the apprehension that prickled across her skin. They had house callers all the time, so this was nothing out of the ordinary. She trudged over to the piano and lifted a finger, stroking one of the keys, but she didn't press down. When the door quickly opened, her apprehension shifted to downright fear as both the housekeeper and the cook walked into the room. Mrs. Maynard? Amy questioned, her eyes locked onto the stricken expression. What's wrong? The cook began to sob, her hands covering her beet-colored face. Oh, now, child. Mrs. Maynard's voice was hoarse, and she reached for Amy. Don't you worry. Everything will be fine. You'll see. Amy froze on the spot. Can you tell me what's wrong? Why's Cook crying? It's your parents, Amy. You mustn't fret. What about them? She looked beyond both adults, into the hallway. The man who'd rushed into the house earlier now stood wringing his hands in the doorway. Mrs. Maynard cleared her throat, her voice barely more than a whisper. There's been an accident. A terrible, terrible accident. Your mother and father, they're with the Lord now, child. Amy gasped, blood roaring in her ears, and she began to shake her head, not hearing another placation from the housekeeper. Everything wouldn't be fine. Nothing would ever be the same again. They're your family's only living kin, Miss Talbot. If they hadn't agreed to take you in, then, well, I wouldn't like to hazard a guess as to where you'd have ended up, Mr. Anderson, her father's lawyer, said from the other side of the carriage. I realize that, Mr. Anderson, but my father and my uncle haven't spoken since before I was born. My parents tried to make amends with him many times, but my uncle always snubbed my father. She looked across at him, holding back the admission that she'd overheard many a conversation between her parents. though she'd never known the reason for the devastating quarrel that had caused the rift between the brothers in the first place. You'll learn when you're older that death can make people see things differently. You should be grateful that your uncle has agreed to take you in. She might only be 11, but she knew the effects of death already. The storm that had caused the road to break away into the river and had swept her parents' carriage into the raging torrents had been the worst that the city had ever seen. She tried to take heart in what he was saying. Maybe her uncle had changed. Maybe losing his only brother had softened his heart. She knew that being the only child could be lonely, and if she had had a sibling, she would always want to be there for them, no matter what. Her gaze was intently on the scene that rushed by beyond the window of the hansom cab. Philadelphia had been blanketed overnight with heavy snowfall, and the world appeared pristine and crisp, clean and pure. Shop windows glowed into the early evening, their festive displays enticing shoppers with their bright red, green, and gold displays of gifts for the holiday season. She knew that by now she would have helped her mama decorate their tree. They would have made salt dough decorations, and Mama would have allowed her to wrap some of the gifts for the staff. Amy loved to make pretty bows out of wide ribbon to hold the wrapping paper together. It made them look even more special when placed under the tree to await Christmas Day. Now, she was on her way to her uncle's house to meet her only living relatives for the first time, and she wondered about his tree. "Does he have any children?" she asked. "I don't remember ever meeting any cousins." The lawyer shook his head. "No children, though they must like them to have taken you in." "Why couldn't I have stayed in my house? Mrs. Maynard and Cook took care of me since." Amy cut the words off, and the lawyer's face softened. "They're not your guardians. I know that they did a wonderful job. They are obviously still very loyal to your parents, and with good cause. Your father provided for them in his will." Amy looked out of the window once more, where the buildings had changed to more residential ones, similar, though not as grand-looking, to the one in which she'd grown up. What will happen to them both now? The staff? They have been provided with references that will help them secure future work, and they have received a sum of compensation for the lack of notice. But where are they? "I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that. My duty under the conditions of your father's last wishes is that my firm was to find suitable care for you. We contacted your Uncle Rupert, explained the terms of your guardianship and trust fund, and he agreed." "I told you, I don't understand all of the words that you use," Amy muttered. "There's lots of legal jargon, and most of them are the reasons that you couldn't remain in the house. My firm oversaw the sale of the house, and the house staff were able to pack up most of the belongings." "Where is it all?" She recalled the boxes and the brown sheets that covered the furniture as they were leaving. Anderson gave her an uncomfortable look, and he tugged at his collar. Amy waited out the answer. "Your uncle sold it all, miss." Shock popped her eyes wide. "Papa's desk? Mama's jewelry? My piano?" She thought about the promise that she'd made to her father to keep playing her piano, although she hadn't been able to bring herself to do so since they died. She thought about the grand desk that he'd sat at most evenings, spectacles on his nose and paperwork stacked up around him, and how her mother would chastise him for working too hard. Then he would bound across the room, sweep her up, and dance her around the space until she was laughing gaily instead of being cross with him. "You should understand that your uncle's house is much smaller, even though he's also in banking as your father was. He said that there simply wasn't the room, I'm afraid." Amy blinked at the wave of fresh tears that stung the back of her eyes. If she'd have known that she wouldn't see any of it again, she would have protested more and taken it with her. She sniffed, turning her face away from the concerned look from the lawyer. "Miss Talbot, it's just things. You still have the memories of your parents," he said kindly. "They cannot take those away from you." She nodded, though she couldn't speak. He was right, of course, but it seemed that every time she saw this man, he told her something else that stripped her further of the life that she'd known. "Your father was a wealthy man, Miss Talbot. Your financial future is secure. The proceeds from the sale of your parents' house, as well as their bank accounts, have all been put into a trust fund for you for when you're older." Amy frowned at him. "What does that mean? What is a trust fund?" "It means that it's held for safekeeping until you're old enough to decide what to do with it yourself. Your aunt and uncle can request access to it if there's anything you may need. Perhaps they'll buy you a new piano." "My papa always took care of the money, but there is nothing I really need. And now your uncle will take care of your money until you are 18. Then you will be an incredibly wealthy young lady." "I'd rather be happy than rich," Amy muttered. "I would give it all back if I could have my parents once more." Anderson sighed. "Come now, Miss Talbot. This is the street on which your aunt and uncle live. Try and at least appear happy when you first meet them." Chapter 2. As Anderson rapped on the front door with the handle of his cane, Amy looked around the street that was to be her new home. The street looked orderly and pretty under the heavy snowfall. The front door was wrenched open and a formidable-looking woman peered down at her, distaste curling her lip. "Is Mr. Talbot home? This is his niece." "He's in the parlor. Step inside," the maid said tartly. "Careful not to make the floor wet. I don't want to have to spend my time cleaning up after you already." Amy tried smiling at the woman, but she stalked off and opened one of the doors off the foyer, muttered something, and then disappeared. Anderson gave her a reassuring nod, and he pointed at the rug so that it would absorb the wet snow as it melted off their shoes, motioned for Amy to join him. The house was sparsely furnished and appeared to be ruthlessly ordered. She'd only ever been in her parents' house, where there were always fresh-cut flowers and pretty ornaments. There was always noise, chatting of staff, her parents' laughter, the clicking of the grandfather clock. Here the silence seemed oppressive. "Where are the Christmas decorations?" Amy whispered, glancing around. Her mother twined evergreens around the balustrades, placing the oranges spiked with cloves into them so that they scented the house. There were always beads and ribbons streaming about the space. "I don't know," he whispered back. "Where's their tree?" She tiptoed to the end of the rug to peer in through the open door, dashing back when she heard footsteps marching towards them. Amy's heart jumped when an older, heavier version of her father stepped into view, and she gasped her delight. Uncle Rupert. Without thinking, she ran towards him, longing for the welcome hug that she had missed from this man. But she was stopped from her reward, caught by the shoulders in her uncle's grip, then none too gently pushed back. She looked up, the images of her happy father merging with the austere grimace of the huge man standing before her. Then she could see the differences. Her father's eyes had held a twinkle, a perpetual glint of humor. This man's eyes were harder, colder. He stared down at the young girl in front of him. "Well, you're a Talbot, all right. Got the blue eyes? Anderson, step this way." "Did you bring the paperwork?" The lawyer seemed flustered under the barking voice, almost as if he was expecting the man to receive his niece more warmly. Instead, Rupert appeared to be unmoved by the emotion of the orphan crying at his feet. Yes, Mr. Talbot. Miss Talbot, I'll be right out." Rupert dismissed his niece with a wave of his hand. "No need. My wife will deal with the problem." "Did you bring the trust fund forms I asked for? I shall need a substantial release if I am to take proper care of her." The door was closed, and Amy stood alone in the space, the dark stain of melting snow expanding around her feet. It was the sigh she heard first. Then a rotund woman appeared from the direction in which the maid had gone. "Greta told me you'd arrived." Amy lifted her lips, tears sheened her eyes. "Are you my Aunt Ida?" The woman sked. "I suppose I am, yes. Where's the lawyer? Did he bring the paperwork for your money?" Amy blinked at the abruptness of the question. "I'm not sure. I think so. He's in with Uncle Rupert now." The woman chuckled, the sound making the loose skin around her bulbous neck wobble. "That's right. He's an uncle. I'm an aunt. I suppose we shall have to get used to that." Piggy eyes raked over Amy's coat, muffler, and boots. "I never had clothes as good as those." Amy glanced down. "Mama bought them for me. Aunt Ida, where's your tree?" "The what?" "Your Christmas tree." Percent. The woman rolled her eyes. "Why would I waste my time and money on something so frivolous?" Amy's eyes rounded when she thought about all the happy memories that she'd shared with her parents at Christmas time. The singing, the praying, the joy, the gifts. Her mother had always made such a fuss. Expense had never come into it. But tomorrow is Christmas Eve? She nudged her niece back, annoyance pinching her mouth. It's just another day in this house. I'll show you to your room. Just remember, this isn't the same place as your parents. She picked up a candle, lit it, and then pointed to the small case that Anderson had set by the door. And you can carry that yourself. I'm not your maid. Oh, no, Aunt Ida, I know. I can do it myself. Amy lifted the case, having to stop several times as she carried the case up to swap hands. Not that it mattered. Her aunt's lumbering gait meant that it took a while for her to climb to the second floor. She puffed her way down the landing and opened a door at the end. Here, this is where you will sleep. The room was plain, with a thin brown blanket on the mattress and a bucket next to the sink in the corner. It's just lovely, Amy replied, trying to win favor with the unfriendly woman. Maybe she would warm to her once she settled in. It must be a shock to suddenly end up with a child in your home, an almost grown one at that. Ida snorted. We don't have the money for fancy houses, though I'm certain I would have moved into your parents' home if your idiot father hadn't made his will the way he did. She sneered as she leaned into Amy. Had to get the last laugh in, didn't he? Well, we'll see. My husband is a clever man, cleverer than Gordon Talbot. Amy's brows furrowed, and she stared at the woman, at her rotten face, and knew that her aunt and uncle hadn't dropped the feud. Anderson had it all wrong. Death hadn't made them forgive the argument. It had only made them bitter and vengeful. And somehow Amy had ended up in the middle of it. I don't understand. Ida turned her back to the child and lit the stubby candle in the dish on the sideboard. When she turned back, the dancing light made her wicked expression even more malevolent. You will. Stay here tonight. In the morning, Greta will give you your chores for the day. The will provides that you must have an education, but there is no such thing in this life as a free ride. You will earn your keep in this house, and you won't grumble once about it. Amy opened her mouth to assure her aunt that she'd had to help with the cleaning at home and had enjoyed working with Mrs. Maynard, but her bedroom door slammed shut. When she heard the rattle of a key slide into the lock and the lock grind into place, Amy covered her mouth with her hand to keep from crying out. She climbed onto the bed, curled into a ball, and allowed the tears to fall. Whatever hope the words of her lawyer had inspired died inside her. Her aunt and uncle were cold and heartless, and she marveled how her happy papa could be related and yet be so very different to Rupert. Maybe tomorrow she could persuade them to buy a Christmas tree. After all, she had the money. Maybe she could teach them about being happy and how to love. After all, she had been brought up in a home where laughter had seemed in abundance. Maybe if she showed them the meaning of Christmas, if she introduced a little joy into their lives, she could make this empty home a happy one. Chapter 3. 6 years later. Happy 17th birthday! Amy gasped her surprise. Oh, Daisy, how did you know? She took the small wrapped gift from her best friend and sat back in her chair. They were in the parlor with a dainty tray of tea set in between them. The fire had been laid, but not yet lit. Daisy plucked the gloves off her fingertips, her mouth twisting in frustration. Well, your wretched aunt and uncle might not allow you to celebrate anything. Shh, Amy looked worriedly at the parlor door. Keep your voice down. Oh, pfft, Daisy huffed and laid her gloves across her lap. I don't care if they do here, Amy. It's your birthday, and I can still smell the cleaning products that they've had you using in here. Amy glanced at her hands and her short, blunted nails that still held the black from cleaning the silver earlier. I still have to do chores, she said in a small voice. Daisy snorted, louder this time. They should be doing your chores. Your money pays for everything in this house, including the wine that Ida guzzles and the fat cigars that Rupert sucks on like they're going out of fashion. She tempered her tone when she could see how hurt her friend was by her words. Sorry, Amy, I just don't like to see your kind nature or your trust fund being taken advantage of. I know, she replied quietly. You're a good, loyal friend. I don't know how I would have made it through these years without you. You didn't have to buy me a gift either, especially as I couldn't get you one. Only because they never allow you to have any money of your own, Daisy remarked drolly as she poured them both a cup of tea. She pushed the saucer towards Amy. So tell me, what is new in your life? Feels like it's been an age since we last spoke. Amy's smile was indulgent. It's been a week. Daisy lifted her cup to her mouth and blew on the steam rising off the liquid. We got interrupted by your aunt, who was cross about something and then took it out on you as usual before she threw me out. What was it about this time? Amy toyed with the ribbon about her gift, the satin making her reminisce over all those years ago when she'd wrap presents for other people. She shrugged when Daisy prompted her. You know she just doesn't like visitors. She likes it when David comes to visit you. Daisy waggled her brows suggestively. Speaking of, how is our handsome banker these days? Amy lifted her shoulders and tried to force her lips upwards, but it turned into more of a grimace when thinking of the man who had been chosen by her aunt and uncle for her to marry. Oh, what's that face mean? Daisy's cup clattered when it was set back into its saucer. She leaned forward and set the cup on the table when Amy seemed reluctant to answer. Will you tell me what's wrong, please? Amy looked to the door, through the window to the blustery fall day, and at the hearth before finally meeting her friend's troubled gaze. I'm not sure. Daisy patted the back of her hand, leaving it there to squeeze. Try before a certain someone bursts in here and tells me to get out. Her lips lifted in one corner. I can't tell you because I can't quite put my finger on it. David is handsome, there's no denying that. And when he first showed interest in me, I was flattered. I was only 16 and he was in his 20s. He would have had to wait 2 years before my coming out party before we could court. So, of course, I was happy when my uncle and aunt approved. After all these years of my trying to make them happy, it seemed that this was the one thing that did it. So, I went along with it. Then Aunt Ida said last month that there would be no coming out party. Naturally, I was shocked, though hardly surprised. There's been no Christmas, no birthdays, or anything like that since I arrived here. Nothing happens in this house whereby money is wasted. And since you were the one who pointed out to me that they were only ever a bit more pleasant to me right before Anderson was due to arrive so that I would agree to give them some more money, well, I suppose since then, I've been looking at my family in a more cynical way. Daisy patted her friend's hand sympathetically, gave her an encouraging nod of her head. Amy continued. When my aunt and uncle fired Greta, I now think they did it because they realized that they could have me as their servant instead, that it would save them some money. I suppose after all this time, I'd hoped that they would grow to like me if I just worked that little bit harder. I've come to realize that they'll never change. They're not nice people, and that just makes me sad. So, life with David would mean an escape for you, Amy? Amy lifted a shoulder and her dark lashes grew wet with her tears. I'd began to hope that it was maybe so. More so when my uncle began to talk of marriage. David has always been polite and pleasant to me. Why do I sense there's a but coming? Amy laughed softly. Any woman would be glad to have a man like David as a husband. He can be charming. He's apparently successful. Daisy lifted her hand to halt her friend, and her brow crinkled. What do you mean can be charming? Surely you should have said is charming? Amy tried to find the words to explain her misgivings in a way to make Daisy understand, though how could that be when she wasn't sure herself? I hate that seeing the truth in my aunt and uncle has made me suspicious of everyone. I was never this way. I never wanted to be this way, she added furiously, slapping a hand to her thigh. But I find myself questioning the sincerity of David's romantic advances. That trust fund, it changes everyone around me. In less than a year, I will be able to make all my financial decisions myself. Until I marry, then it all falls to my husband, which conveniently happens to be someone who was selected by my uncle. More importantly, someone who works for my uncle. Daisy blinked as comprehension dawned. You think that your uncle has engineered this relationship in order to gain access to your trust fund? Amy's eyes shot to the door. Rupert would be at work, but Ida was still somewhere in the house. Probably sleeping off one of her wine stupors, but still, she didn't want to take any chances. I don't know. She admitted in a hushed voice as she rubbed at her temples. I know I'm tired of thinking the worst of people, sick of looking for the hidden truths when there may be none. I wish I didn't have the trust fund. It changes how people act around me, except you, she added quickly when Daisy gave her a hurt look. The look changed to a smug one. I'll always be your friend. How about I marry myself a rich man and then I'll hire you? Only, instead of you working and cleaning for me, we'll sit in the parlor and drink tea all day and gossip. Amy laughed then, a deep belly laugh that had a cathartic effect on her. It felt good to be able to laugh, especially when she felt like she was having to analyze everything and everyone around her at the moment. Whatever is that noise in here? The door swept open and Ida stood in the doorway. Her expression was one of perpetual distaste, and Amy's guess had been right. Her eyes were bloodshot, and she had a crease down one side of her face from her recent slumber. The two girls sobered up immediately. Sorry, Aunt, Amy said quickly. Daisy was just dropping off my birthday gift. What? The old crone barked. A birthday gift? What a waste of money. But it's my money to waste, Daisy said, her tone pleasant, even though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Then more fool you, Ida muttered. You don't have time to sit around drinking my tea either. You have silver to clean. Already done, Aunt, Amy replied mildly. Then you have a meal to prepare. You know Rupert expects his supper on the table, and I get it in the neck if you've not done it. Amy suppressed a sigh and pulled back her lips in a pained smile. I will get to that now. Daisy pressed to her feet, collected her gloves, and was polite enough to wait until Ida had waddled from the room before she rolled her eyes and tutted. Honestly, she would test the patience of a saint, that woman. Roll on when you're 18, she whispered. Amy nodded. I'll see you out. Daisy's carriage was in the street, and her driver had his collar pulled up against the wind. But he hopped down to the roadside when the two women emerged onto the stoop. Daisy's father was wealthy, and not for the first time, Amy was struck by how different her life could have been if her parents had still been alive. Daisy had more than a modicum of freedom. She had use of the family transport whenever she needed it, and a modest allowance so that she could buy things for her friends. It was another thing for Amy to miss about her old life. Thank you for the gift. I hope you like it. I'll call by again next week. Daisy leaned in to hug her friend, and her mouth was next to Amy's ear. You are an amazing person, and I hate to see you like this. You could always go speak to your lawyer. Maybe he could advise you on how to proceed where you stand. After all, his firm is still in charge of the fund for now. The idea sounded ludicrous, and yet Amy trusted Daisy implicitly. Do you think? How would I get there? Daisy leaned back. I could set it up, come and collect you? What would I say to my aunt? You know Ida doesn't like me going out. Daisy rested her forehead against Amy's. Ida is a controlling mare. You have one more year and you'll be out from under their hold. They said their goodbyes, especially as the driver was stamping his feet in a bid to offset the chill, and Amy closed the front door and then headed down the narrow stairs to the kitchen and scullery. She took potatoes from the pantry and a ham hock and set about peeling the potatoes. The mundane task, one she'd performed many times in her years here, allowed her mind to wander. 1 year, she whispered. In 1 year, she would be of age. She could be free of her aunt and uncle and their domineering ways. If they got their way, she would be married to David and out from under their feet. Is that why? She sighed. Daisy was right. Forewarned is forearmed. She needed to know what her rights were with this trust fund. It was about time she stopped being so naive and took back control of her life. Miss Talbot, a delight to see you again. Miss Duncan, nice to finally meet you. Won't you both come on through? Anderson swept an arm, though his appreciative gaze didn't leave Daisy as she sauntered past him. He hurriedly shut the door and rushed to hold Daisy's seat for her. Amy's lips twitched as she saw her best friend blush profusely under such a direct stare. Anderson hadn't changed an awful lot since Amy had first met him at her parents' funeral, except his face was a little more lined and he now wore eyeglasses. The girls refused any refreshments, and Amy waited for him to settle on the other side of the desk. I assume you're here over the recent changes to the paperwork? Prosktor Pagilling. I've had them brought over from our office in Boston, seeing as things are moving forward at quite a pace now. He opened a manila-colored folder and lifted out a sheath of papers. The two girls exchanged a puzzled look while he tapped the edges of the papers against his desktop. I must say, when the suggestion was first made by your uncle, I was astonished that you were marrying so young. But who am I to stand in the way of true love? He smiled over the wired frames at Daisy. The smile slid from his face when he took in the blank look that they were giving him. Have I said something wrong? What changes are you talking about? Amy asked him. Well, the ones where you're signing over the fund to a Mr. Anderson ran a finger down the page. Smithson? He raised his eyes expectantly to her and sighed when both women exchanged another baffled look. I see, he said quietly. Have you seen any paperwork regarding Mr. Smithson? Or can I assume that all of the paperwork I've seen on this matter so far bears a forged signature of yours? Amy shook her head, the ramifications of what he'd said now rolling out before her. Can you explain what's happened, please? Your uncle has requested that the trust fund be handed over to your new husband after your wedding, set for September 5th next year, so a few days before your 18th birthday. But David hasn't proposed yet, Daisy interjected. Anderson sighed his dismay. It appears that your uncle is trying to misappropriate your funds. Once the marriage is completed, Mr. Smithson would be in control of your fortune. It was the proviso that drew my initial concern, but when I heard from Miss Duncan here that you needed a meeting, I assumed that you were on board with it, and that that's why you were seeking me out. What is the proviso? That your uncle withdraws a healthy pension annually until he passes away. It's unusual, but not irregular. I assumed that because they'd provided a roof over your head, you'd agreed. Daisy snorted and threw up her hands. She's their servant. One might even say their slave. His eyes widened. Is this true, Amy? Her cheeks suffused with pink in embarrassment as she nodded and turned away from him in shame. If she hadn't mentioned her misgivings to Daisy, would she have ever even discovered any of this? She hasn't seen 1 cent from any of the withdrawals that have been made, Mr. Anderson. I mean, they've fed her, and they've provided her with clothes so that she doesn't appear destitute, as that wouldn't reflect the successful image that they're trying to project. They're not nice people, Daisy added indignantly. The lawyer drummed his fingers on the top of his desk as he considered the information. What are my options? Amy asked. Well, there isn't that many open to you, I'm afraid. You're female, so until you're of age, you cannot access the money. What if she was to run away? Daisy suggested. His long, elegant fingers spread in a form of a shrug. Then she would forfeit her guardianship, and her uncle would have a good case to contest her claim, saying that she abandoned it. Daisy leaned forward, expression earnest. But she could argue his contestation? His lips pursed as he thought about it. Yes, she could. Or she could marry another man if this David wasn't an eligible suitor. The fund would automatically fall to your husband, though I would recommend waiting until after your birthday for ease of transferring. Although, it means courting another, and from what you say, I'm not sure that they would allow that to go ahead, which means you'd have to conduct yourself in secret. Unimorse. I wouldn't put it past your uncle to claim your new husband had coerced you or such. Is there another man who might be of interest? Amy covered her face with her gloved hands. The situation seemed such a dreadful mess. The deceit of her uncle and aunt had shocked her. She'd tried so hard over the years to be obedient and tried to court their favor and earn a little warmth from them. She felt her eyes sting with unshed tears and wiped under her eyes with her fingertips, sniffing as she sat back. It's an awful lot to take in, Amy murmured as she shook her head. I feel like I'm trapped between a rock and hard place. I do so wish that this fund didn't exist. It makes people do dreadful things. With respect, Miss Talbot, without it, you almost certainly would have ended up on the streets. I know that Rupert and Ida have exploited their control, in quite an appalling manner, it seems. But your father did you a favor by providing for you. Amy sighed, her hands flopping to her thighs. My father would be furious that his brother has manipulated me in this manner, of that I'm certain. How do you wish to proceed? Amy shrugged, feeling nauseated and sordid. David hadn't even hinted at a longer-term arrangement for them, and now she knew what the missing element was, where she couldn't put her finger on how he treated her. It was hollow. The gestures, whilst looking romantic at first glance, were empty and insincere, which now made sense to her. He was going through the motions, trying to trick her into the ultimate humiliation. He only wanted her for her money. "I won't marry him," she muttered out loud, and drew the stares of the other two occupants in the room, oblivious to the undercurrents flowing between them both. "David," she added, "when he proposes, I don't love him, and he isn't having a penny of my darling papa's hard-earned pennies." "But then they'll know something is up," Daisy replied. "We can't let them know we're on to them, at least until we have a plan moving forward." "Miss Duncan has a valid point, Amy. At present, they still think they have the upper hand, and now I'm involved. I can keep you apprised of any changes. You have a spy in the camp, so to speak. But you work for my uncle, Mr. Anderson. Your loyalty will lie with him." He shook his head, a small smile creasing his lips. "Actually, I don't. Your father made specific requests in his will that all costs were to come from the fund until your age of majority, so I work for you. We will proceed however you wish." Daisy steepled her fingers and tapped the index ones to her chin. "All we need is a plan." Chapter 4. Amy walked out of the church and had to huddle deeper into her coat. The ground was frozen hard, the dirt packed in by frost. The heavy mists hung in the air, with the bare trees lurking in the bright morning light. Daisy slid her arm into hers and they walked towards the entrance of the churchyard, moving with the flow of the congregation. Sundays were a joy to Amy. She was allowed to show her faith without fear of reprisal from her aunt, who dismissed Amy's talk of prayers. As such, she had turned more secretive when talking to God. When she had grown old enough, Daisy had offered to take her to church in their cab, and it became an escape for Amy from the mundane and quiet house of her family. "This winter will be a long one," Amy said, leaning into her friend. Daisy laughed. "I think you're the only one around here ever concerned with the weather." "It affects my plants," Amy replied, a smile on her lips. "All I know is I'm freezing, and it's not even November yet." They reached the cab. Once inside, Daisy settled a blanket over their legs. "Okay, now we're alone. Tell me all that's happened this week." Amy blew into her cupped hands, taking a moment to gather her thoughts. "I think that they're gearing up for the proposal. This week, David and I went to the theater." "Ooh, how was it?" Amy sighed and shrugged glumly. "I thought I would have loved the experience, but the truth is, I couldn't concentrate. Every little touch or word he said, I can't help but analyze it. And we're no further to coming up with a solution. I feel so helpless." Daisy picked up her small reticule, undid the clasp, and pulled out a small magazine. "I think that I might have thought of an answer. Look at this." "The Matrimonial Times?" Amy read. "What is it?" "A place where men in the West advertised for wives." Amy's brows shot up. "Wives?" She turned it over, the idea abhorrent to her, and then she shook her head and held the paper out to Daisy. "That sounds like a terrible plan." Daisy pushed her hand back. "Hear me out. You get to choose a husband, out of there. They are men who are quite frank about what they're looking for in most cases. Some want housekeepers. Some want a mother for their children. Some are just lonely and looking for love." Amy held her hand firmly. "I don't want a husband." "You don't want David as a husband because of his treachery," Amy corrected gently. "You always talked about having a family, though, Amy, and a loving marriage like the one your parents shared. Theirs was based on love, though, and they knew each other." "We were strangers once," Daisy reminded her, "and now look at us. Every stranger is a friend you're yet to meet." Amy pulled the paper towards her, considering, as her friend's words reverberated through her. She was right. Once upon a time, she'd been desperately lonely. Now she couldn't imagine her life without Daisy in it. At least read it and have a serious think about it. You never know, you might just find the one for you, and you'll fall madly in love and have plenty of little children, as you always dreamed of. Her eyes turned sly as she smirked at Amy. "I've circled my favorite ones, to save on time." Amy's lips twitched in response. It was hard to be cross with Daisy when she was only trying to help. But the truth of it was that in the month since she'd met with the lawyer, she hadn't been able to come up with a plan other than to go along with the ruse so as not to arouse any suspicion. That had been hard, to try to act as gullible as she had before with the three of them, and not shout that she knew all about their wretched plans. Having to smile and laugh with David's obvious flirting left her feeling even more desolate. "Hey," Daisy snapped her fingers to pull Amy's attention back to her. "We're almost back at your uncle's house. You need to hide that away so that they don't see it." Amy's eyes filled with tears. She turned to look out over the frozen vista and desperately tried to stem the flow. Crying wouldn't solve anything. Her friend caught her by the hand and squeezed until Amy looked back at her. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Daisy sighed. "Yes, you do. You've been through worse than this, and you came out the other side. You have the chance to choose your own destiny. This is just one idea. It might not even work. But you can get to know someone without them knowing about your trust fund, and you will then know if they're being genuine or not. How can I trust who they are when even my own family are duplicitous? If I hold the information back, doesn't that make me just as bad? Then you can tell then when the time is right. If they love you for you, they won't care if you're a wealthy woman or not. Be as honest as you can, but without telling the whole truth. For now." Daisy tutted when the carriage jerked to a stop outside the dwelling that had become to feel more like a prison. "Your aunt is already in the window waiting on you," she murmured, holding the blanket up to shield Amy while she tucked the newspaper into her purse. The thought of going in and facing her aunt and whatever demands she chose to make on her today filled her with dread. As she said her goodbyes to Daisy with a promise to read the advertisements, her feet felt heavier as she walked up the stone steps. The house wasn't the magnificent brownstone that she'd grown up in, but right now it felt more akin to a prison than anything else. Her aunt came through the door and started listing her complaints off on her fingers, and Amy's mind spun out of control. She replied when appropriate as her thoughts tumbled over the next. Surely, unless she took control of her life, she would be swapping a life of servitude to her aunt for one of goodness knew what, being married to a duplicitous man like David. How bad could it be marrying a man she didn't know on the other side of the country? He might just be the one for her. The image of plenty of children gathered around the Christmas tree, of a piano in the corner of the room, of a man who worshipped her as her father had done with her mother. Mind made up, she vowed to study the newspaper from cover to cover and reply to the one that resonated the most. Chapter 5. "Today is going to be the day," Mitch exclaimed with a decisive nod. "I can feel it in my bones." Ellis Maddocks refrained from rolling his eyes. "Mitch, you've said that every time we've visited the town for supplies in the past 2 months, and my advertisement segment is yet to have a response that has panned out to any more than mild interest or flat-out strangeness." The old ranch hand chortled and scratched at the whiskers on his cheek as he acknowledged his boss had a valid point. "I must admit that one from New York still puzzles me." Ellis lifted a broad shoulder. "I can only assume she had a better offer from another man. After all, there aren't many people who would take all this on." The rancher swept a hand around them, encompassing the vast Montana country in all of its wintry beauty. The wagon wheels followed the road that cut between the evergreen trees, their vivid snow-dappled branches a contrast to the deep snow that covered the ground. Mitch squinted against the brightness of the snow as he looked out over the country he loved. "I love it, and I still can't believe that you gave an old-timer like me a job and a home. I'll be forever obliged to you, Ellis, and that's the truth." "It was the best decision I ever made, Mitch." He pointed a gloved finger at his friend. "And that's the truth of it. I had to work my behind off for so long to make the ranch work and build the herd to a number that made it profitable. Out of all the hands I hired across the years, you were the only one who was genuine and who didn't run off to the saloon to blow your wage on beer and women. Nora would have skinned me. Not that I ever looked at another girl since I fell for her." Mitch nodded. tugging on his collar. "She's still the prettiest girl I ever did see." Ellis held back a sigh. Seeing Mitch and Nora together had been part of what had inspired him to place an advertisement in the Matrimonial Times in the first place. That, and the need to fill his home with a family. He'd staked his homesteader claim on the land and hadn't left the ranch for any reason but to get supplies or stock. He'd agreed to work the land and to make it profitable. He'd started out with only 5 steers and had bred the herd to well over 100. He'd built his cabin and had longed to fill it with happiness and laughter, with family and love. Though, being a rancher up in the hills in Montana Territory wasn't exactly conducive to socializing with fair ladies. There weren't enough women to go around for all the men looking. And while he could also find company at the saloon, it wasn't what he longed for. He wanted someone to call his own, someone with whom to build a life. When he'd heard about a lumberjack in the town who'd courted a good woman from back east by letter, his ears had pricked up. Mitchell had been a mainstay in the hands he'd hired in the summers for branding and such throughout the past 5 years, and it had been an easy job to hire him full-time, taking on Nora as a sort of housekeeper for them both. It had been a wonderful and welcome change to have company in the nights, to have someone to bounce ideas off, but it had also shown him just how lacking his life truly was. He's always wanted a ranch. Now he had that. He wanted someone to share it all with. "I have her shopping list for the mercantile. She's added a few extras. I think she wants to decorate the tree for Christmas, and I have to buy a gift for her, or else." Mitchell's face held a glimmer of adoration that crinkled his rheumy eyes. "Must be a woman thing." "Oh, I don't know," Ellis replied, and made a note that he ought to look for a gift for Nora, seeing as she'd transformed his rough cabin into a palace since she'd moved in. "It'll make a welcome change to have someone to share Christmas with this year. In fact, add some cocoa to the list. I haven't had hot cocoa on Christmas Eve since I was a kid." "You like Christmas, too?" Mitchell's voice tilted in surprise. "Sure," Ellis replied self-consciously. "All these years, I've just let it slip on by as just another day. There didn't seem any point in doing anything special as I was always on my own." Mitch clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, not this year, you're not. And next year, maybe we'll have an extra chair at the dinner table." His brows waggled suggestively. "Maybe," Ellis replied wistfully, as he saw the familiar sights of the town of Elk Peak come into view. He could see the steeple point of the small gray church, and this time he did sigh. He'd thought he would have been married in there by now. He'd planned on a summer wedding and then possibly his wife with child by Christmas, but it hadn't turned out quite that easy. His excitement over the advertisement he'd placed in the summer was beginning to wane. He wished he could hold on to the enthusiasm and assuredness that Mitch and Nora seemed to hold that she was out there somewhere. "Trust me, I feel it in my old bones," Mitch nodded. "If you go by the post office today, I bet Theodore Linton has a letter for you." Ellis chuckled. "I think Nora will also skin you if she hears that you're gambling." Mitchell's face grew red as he stared at his boss. "You don't be telling that good woman a thing, my boy. There's a cowboy code, you know." It was Ellis's turn to clap the ranch hand jovially. "Don't worry, your secret is safe with me." He pulled the wagon up outside the mercantile. Telling himself to get the mundane tasks over with in case Mitch was finally right, and the reply he'd been waiting for all this time was really there. Wouldn't that be the best Christmas gift of all? "It's nearly Christmas," Amy whispered to herself. "Everyone has a Christmas tree. I thought that maybe this year we might—" She cut off the words and shook her head. She'd been trying to rehearse the words to ask for the money to buy a tree. Every year she'd asked, and every year her request had been scoffed at or ridiculed. But she couldn't go another year without asking. She longed for the Christmas that she'd had as a child, and still held on to the belief that if only her family could accept happiness into their hearts, they too would feel the magic and the happiness that could surround a united family at Yuletide. "Uncle Rupert," she tried again, "I'm almost 18, and I am almost of an age where—" She heard the front door slam shut and footsteps cross the hallway above her. She braced her hands on the edge of the sink. Good, he was home. She tugged on the strings of her apron and undid the knot before she pulled in a bracing breath and ran up the stairs to Rupert's office. She paused outside the door when she heard the rumble of voices. She leaned in closer and listened. "It's in here somewhere," Rupert grumbled. "I sold most of it, but I did keep a few pieces, just in case I needed to liquidate them in later years." "Are you sure she won't recognize it?" She heard the familiar drawl from David, and she cupped her hand over her mouth to stifle her shocked gasp. "I doubt it. The silly girl believes I sold everything of her mother's already, and I'm not drawing on her fund just to buy her a pointless gift for Christmas. But people will be expecting it of you. Ah, here it is. I thought a brooch would be appropriate for the first gift you'll give her." "Doesn't look like much, does it?" "Well, my brother didn't have much to begin with, so I don't know when he would have bought it." "Insensate. Make sure you tell her how much it cost, and then she'll know how much she means to you." Amy heard the click of a box that was being snapped shut. "I'll do my best, although I do have her eating out of my hand. She was hanging on to my every word the other day." "That's good." Amy heard the office chair creak its protest as her uncle sat in it. "Keep it that way until after the wedding. Then you can do as you wish. Take as many lovers as you like." Rupert's mocking laughter sounded like rocks in a metal bucket. "By then, we'll have control of that money, and she won't matter. She will look good on my arm, and we'll have handsome children," David agreed. "I am certain that I will get bored of her soon, though. She always harps on about her plants." "Women are a strange sort." "What will you do with the rest of the jewelry that you've got there?" Rupert cleared his throat. "Well, there will be birthdays and other Christmases over the years," he laughed. "I'm sure there's a few years' worth here, and she won't know that you are just gifting the items that were always hers in the first place." Amy backed away from the door. Her mother's jewelry. All these years they'd kept it from her, even as she'd been grieving. A little item from the hoard they must have would have eased the ache of loss just a little, yet they couldn't even do that for her. Tears ran down her cheeks and she sprinted up the stairs, holding back the sobs. Her room was on the top floor, the same tiny room she'd been shown by her aunt all those years ago. It seemed a lifetime. And the cruel words that David had spoken, and the mockery in his tone. She'd finally seen that he was just like her uncle, and she could never share her life with someone so calculating. She couldn't stay here for a moment longer than necessary. She sat at her desk and yanked her Bible towards her. Lifting the book carefully, she flicked through the pages until the folded advertisement popped out. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and collected her writing implements. She sucked in a steadying breath as she read the now familiar words. Advertisement number 124. Ellis Maddocks, 30 years of age, a hard-working yet lonely rancher in Montana, seeks a lady for company leading to marriage. "I have dark hair, brown eyes, and a strong back. I have my farm. Now I dream to fill it with children and happiness, the same as I had as a child. The right woman needs to not be afraid of work, be of good nature, and be tough enough to withstand the harsh winters and long hours that life on a Montana ranch requires. I can offer you a fair and honest home, not too far from the local town. I have a modest income and am growing my herd to be able to provide for my family. Only serious applicants need apply." Her fingers traced the words once more, and she smiled. She'd been imagining him ever since she had first read the words. His was the only advertisement that had a ring of authenticity about it. She heard the front door close, the slam echoing through the house, and it pulled her back to the current predicament. No changes were going to happen unless she took action. To Mr. Ellis Maddocks, "My name is Amy Talbot, and I am nearly 18 years old. I live in Philadelphia with my aunt and uncle, who took me in after my parents were tragically killed in a terrible accident almost 7 years ago. Whilst my childhood was one of laughter and happiness, my aunt and uncle are not the cheerful sort and have now planned to marry me off to one of their colleagues, all without my consent. Your advertisement struck a chord with me as you spoke of family. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve. When I was small, I would have spent the day helping Mama decorate the tree and wrap gifts and giving thanks for our blessings to the Lord. I would have also played the piano for my dearest papa. I haven't touched a key since they passed away, and my aunt doesn't believe in spending on frivolities such as Christmas. This might make me sound as though I am a petulant child when I know that there are people who go without every day of the year. I think that this time of year was always such a special one that it makes me miss my loving family even more. I help a great deal around my aunt's home, taking care of them, cooking, cleaning, and the like, so I'm not afraid of hard work. The darkest time of my life was losing my parents, and I prayed to the Lord to see me through, so I'm certain that I can handle whatever Montana has to throw at me, as long as I have love in my heart and my faith to guide me. I'm not even sure that you haven't already filled the position, if I can call it that, as I was given the papers back in October. Although I have often thought about you since I read it, I feel that now is the time to send my reply. Happy Christmas, Mr. Maddocks, which is the first time I have been able to say that in a long time. From Amy Talbot. Chapter 6. Here you go, Nora cried as she slapped the letter down on the table next to him. Ellis paused with the spoon halfway to his mouth. What's that? I called in at the post office when I went to town today. Ellis looked out at the blizzard that had turned the outside world into a white hazard. You went to town today? Nora skied and sat down. I went earlier before the storm hit. Mitchell's spoon clattered onto his plate, and he folded his arms. I thought I told you to wait. What if you'd have got stranded out there? What would I do if I lost you? Mitchell Crabbe, I am old enough to take care of myself. I needed some things from town. I knew you boys wouldn't be away too long, and I took advantage of the same weather break you did. This storm looks to be set in for a few days, though. I don't remember a January quite as bleak as this one. Don't try and change the subject, Mitchell sulked. Tell her, Ellis. Ellis looked at Nora, who raised a brow in a silent challenge at him, and he quickly shoveled the spoon into his mouth. This stew is amazing, Nora, he mumbled around the food. Best one yet, and just what I needed to thaw me out after a cold day in the saddle. Coward, Mitch muttered as he resumed eating. Nora angled a stern look at her husband. He's a man who knows when to pick his battles. Now she nodded at the envelope. That's a letter from Philadelphia. Who do you know from there? Ellis shrugged and refused to allow the little bubble of hope that it was someone replying to the advertisement he'd placed last summer. He'd let go of that foolish notion now. It had been hard. Winter meant that the days were shorter and there wasn't much in the way of work that needed attention. They simply had to batten down the hatches and wait for the thaw, mostly. I'll get to it. He spooned up more stew, marveling at the juicy, meaty chunks and vegetables. It was certainly better than anything he'd ever managed to knock up. Open it, Nora motioned. It's been burning a hole in my pocket ever since Theodore Linton hollered me in from across the street. Let the boy alone, Mitchell chided his wife gently. I know you're bored on account of it being winter and all, but a man is entitled to his privacy. Fine, Nora sighed and cleared their plates away, carrying them to the sink in the corner. Beyond the window, the wind howled, swirling the snow into a frenzied blizzard. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the room was pleasantly scented with log smoke and stew. It was a homely atmosphere, and Ellis wondered who the letter could be from. The handscript certainly looked feminine. He swiped the envelope off the table and tucked it into his breast pocket, sending a grateful look at Mitch, and he carried his plate to Nora, where he pressed a kiss to her head. Let me read it in private, and then I'll tell you about it. The woman gifted him a happy smile and cupped a wrinkled hand to his cheek. Shall I make us some tea while you read it by the fire? Try and thaw your feet out a bit more. Nora, if you weren't already married to my best friend, I'd propose right now to you. She laughed, as he'd expected her to, and carried a lamp into the small room at the side. He'd extended the cabin 2 years ago and planned to add on the second floor just as soon as he'd grown the herd a bit more. Paying Mitchell a wage meant that he wasn't saving quite as much every month as he'd like to, but he'd get there. The small fire in his room had reduced to only glowing embers, so he took a moment to stoke the fire to take the chill from the room. As the flames crackled happily across the logs, He settled in the leather chair next to the fire and opened the envelope. He read the first few lines and then sat forward eagerly as he read on. Then he reread. Quickly, he rose and moved to the small table that he'd been using as a desk since Mitch and Nora moved in. Dear Miss Talbot, I write to you in the middle of a snow blizzard. A man could barely see a few feet in front of him, let alone count the head of cattle or check the fences. I've been out in the deep snow for only a few hours, and it's taken your letter to warm me up, despite sitting fireside as I do so. It hurts my heart to read of a woman who sounds as lost but still as hopeful as you, and I read in it a kinship that we must share, of finding hope where there appears to be none. I had many a happy childhood and good memories of whittling with my grandfather while he told me stories from his childhood. I always dreamed of sharing those with a child of my own someday. Some men would say a son, though I wouldn't mind a little girl either, as long as the child was healthy and strong, if the good Lord should grant me such a blessing. I feel as if he has answered my prayers by sending news of you, as I'd all but given up hope of a reply. You might think me a silly man, but I said a prayer on Christmas Day as we were sharing gifts, and I wonder if maybe he heard me. What of the man that your uncle has betrothed you to? Is he a good man? Tell me what you look like and what you like to do for pleasure. You mention a piano. I like to play the guitar, although I haven't picked one up for years. I'm sure I should very much like to hear you play, however. Where would I find a piano in the middle of the Montana wilderness? I digress. What else to write, other than I am delighted to make your acquaintance and look forward to hearing from you once more. Ellis Maddocks, Elk Peak, Montana. He set the pen down, checked the words once more, and nodded in satisfaction. For some strange reason, this felt right, as if this is what he'd been waiting for all these months. He heard the shuffling of feet and the whispers at his bedroom door, and he grinned. It's okay, Nora. You can come on in now. Will you tell me his reply? Daisy begged. I shall call by this week. How about Tuesday? You would have penned a reply by then, and I can sneak it off and mail it for you. Amy held the envelope in her hands and felt the frisson of excitement zag along her veins. She'd been waiting for what seemed eons for his response, even though it had only been a few weeks. Daisy had assured her that it was winter, and the mail would be hindered by the weather in some parts, especially if it was as rural as the advertisement had made out. Amy agreed to meet her friend, preferring to read the letter in the privacy of her room in case he was rejecting her. She had to wait until she'd completed her tasks and cooked supper for the household before she could steal a few moments alone to read his reply. His words made her happy, and she stroked the paper as if she could get more of a sense of the gentleman that Ellis Maddocks seemed to be. Without waiting, she quickly penned her reply. Dear Mr. Maddocks, I feel that if we are to get to know one another, it may be better if you were to call me Amy. If you find that too forward, then I apologize. In answer to your questions, I have dark hair that is almost black in a certain light, and very dark blue eyes. I stand at just over 5 feet and am of slight build, though don't be fooled, I am strong of back also. I find pleasure in nurturing my plants, although there hardly seems time to water and plant on most days with the chores that I must get done. I would imagine you would have plenty of space in which to garden. Prosody. As for how the man is who has been chosen for me, whereas I am acquainted with him, I feel that I don't truly know his nature, and what little I do know, I care not to learn any more. My uncle and aunt took me in when I had nowhere else to go, and I am grateful to them for their hospitality. I could not, in truth, call it care, though I wouldn't wish ill on any of them. I feel that I have no choice other than to try and find a better match for myself, as I have always dreamed of being free to marry a man of my choosing and one I could grow to love and share my life with. You say, we exchanged gifts? Do you have family living with you? Please tell me more. She touched the small brooch that she'd been given by David and had worn every day. Her aunt and uncle believed it was because she had been incredibly happy with it, and that suited her because it meant she was free to wear that small butterfly without fear of repercussions. It was the first gift that she'd had since her parents had died, and her tears when she'd opened the small velvet box had been genuine. Her uncle had overindulged on the wine that day, and he'd let slip of David's intentions to marry her. Amy had really had to act then, knowing what she did about their true plans for her. It had made her wait for Ellis's letter even more agonizing. She carried on penning her letter. You are lucky to be able to share Christmas Day with your loved ones. It's a gift and you should cherish it. How big a herd do you have? Tell me more about your home and your life. How did you become a rancher? What does it entail? I want to know all about you and your life. Looking forward to hearing back from you, Amy Talbot. Daisy laughed as she opened the carriage door and moved back to allow Amy into the interior of the cab. Goodness, it's coming down. Amy shook her head, using a handkerchief to mop the rain off her face. Mad March showers indeed. How are you? Daisy's eyes danced happily. I have double the news today, she breathed on a beaming smile. Amy frowned at her best friend. You're almost glowing, Daisy. Why are you so happy? Anderson asked my father for permission to ask for my hand in marriage, she cried, pressing her hands together. Can you believe it? Amy threw her arms around her friend's neck. I'm so happy for you, Daisy. Of course, your father would approve. Anderson is a man of honor and integrity. Daisy pulled back to squeeze her friend's hand. I have something for you, too. She produced a letter from her reticule. Although my father was asking about them, I'm afraid he saw the Montana postmark, and he wanted to be sure before he accepted Anderson's proposal. There have been a few letters coming through with such regularity that he's noticed them, or maybe the staff told him, I'm not sure. Anyway, I told him the truth, Amy. The shock had her heart stalling in her chest. Daisy, no, he'll tell my uncle. He won't, she reassured her. He's promised me. It so happens that Anderson was there to back up my story. Honestly, my father was disgusted and furious that you've been put through all this. He has offered any assistance that you may need. Daisy patted Amy's hand. This is a good thing. You have the support of people who care for you. Now, what of our rancher? How is he? She tapped the envelope in Amy's hands. Amy took 2 attempts to break the seal on the envelope with her hands shaking as they were. They'd started reading and compiling the letters in the carriage. And Daisy delivered mail during the week to expedite their courtship. He writes that his acreage is doing well. He says. He signed for the land under the Homesteader Act and is pleased that he finally seems to be making a decent profit. Calving season is about to start. Once that's over, he must start branding his stock. Then he will sort the stock into those for the market so that he can buy a new stock so as not to crossbreed his herd. Amy scanned the letter and smiled when she saw the ending. He's signed off saying, Yours, Ellis. Daisy flopped back, her sight drifting out the window dreamily. Oh, Amy, that makes me happier. Do you think he'll propose? I don't know. I only know that David is about to propose. I can sense it. Thankfully, we have Anderson on the case. I have a feeling that they might try to move the date up to get access to the trust fund sooner. Anderson would have warned us. You need to keep acting as if everything is fine. The proposal will come soon. You mark my words. Let's write your reply now. I've asked the driver to take the long way home to give us more time. All too soon, the carriage pulled up outside the house that she had grown to resent, and she packed up her papers and paraphernalia begrudgingly to return inside what had become her prison. She would burn Ellis's letter as she would the rest. She had committed his address to memory. She didn't want anything getting in the way of her plans. She lifted a hand to wave when her aunt opened the door and called to her. Amy, what kept you? We've been waiting for you. Come in. Ida allowed her into the hallway and waved her hands so that she could take Amy's coat. Amy made sure to keep a hand on her reticule. What's wrong, Aunt? Ida was positively vibrating. David is here. He has an important question to ask you, she grinned. Amy's heart plunged even as she forced her lips up into a smile. I must just visit the water closet. She dashed off, knowing that her aunt wouldn't deny her answering the call of natural if David was in the house. In the kitchen, she put Ellis's letter into the stove and then splashed cool water on her clammy skin. She pulled in a bracing breath and sent up a prayer asking for poise and composure to get through the next few minutes without cracking up. Chapter 7. What news do we have from back east? Ellis couldn't help the wide grin that slid across his face at Mitch's question that he'd been waiting to hear all day. I mailed my latest letter yesterday, he told Mitch, latching the gate behind the last steer. It had been a busy day, keeping the old ranch hand's mind occupied, but now the last yearling was branded, and yet another season was complete. The bellows from cows separated from their calves filled the air. The smell of the branding fork wouldn't leave him for a few days, but he knew that the process guaranteed the stock were known as his and were much less likely to be stolen. "Oh, what's that grin all about?" Mitch nudged him. "Oh, Ellis pretended to ponder a moment. Beautiful summer's day. Branding is all done for another year. Good price for beef at the market, so we managed to make some profit for the year again. Proposed to Amy," he tacked on quietly, and almost counted to 3 before Mitch reacted with a whoop. "That's wonderful news, although I do have to say it's about time. You've done nothing but be cheerful ever since that girl started writing to you. I can even see you staring off into space when we're out riding when you should be concentrating on what you're supposed to be doing. Do you think she'll accept?" Mitch was only echoing Ellis's deepest concerns, but he'd taken the leap of faith when he'd sent his last letter to her. It felt right asking her. She seems a level-headed woman, though I'm still not entirely clear on the situation with her family or why they're arranging this marriage that she's so against. He slid a boot into the stirrup and swung up into the saddle, then turned his horse for home. "Although I'm not complaining that she doesn't want to marry him. I've fallen in love with the idea of her. I don't think I've ever met a woman who's so open and frank about her feelings. It has me dismissing any niggling doubts. I sure will be as nervous as a cat in a room full of rockers until she replies, though, and that's no lie." Mitch mopped his bald head with his bandana and tucked the rag in his pocket. "Course she'll say yes. She done nothing but write to you. I bet she's been waiting for you to propose the whole time. She'll be here before the fall, and then we can look forward to a proper Christmas with the tree and turkey." He rubbed his flat stomach. "Making me hungry just thinking about that." Ellis smiled at the old ranch hand's words, unwilling to admit out loud that the thought of having a wife and a proper family Christmas for the first time in his cabin filled him with more excitement than if he'd been a little boy again, waiting on Christmas morning. Mitch put his hat back on and adjusted the brim against the bright afternoon sun. "I shall add her to my prayers tonight, and I know Nora will be happy to have another woman around here. She gets lonely this time of year when I'm out working all the daylight hours. Will do her good to have some company." Ellis sighed. "Her and me both." Amy dashed down the steps into the carriage where Daisy and Anderson waited for her. "What took you so long?" Daisy hissed. "I've been worried sick out here." Amy held up the small case containing her mother's jewelry. "It took me an age to find this. He'd hidden it in the back of his bureau. I wasn't leaving without it." Anderson closed the door and glanced up at the facade of the building before he tapped on the wall and signaled the driver to move. "Do you think they suspect?" Amy shook her head. "Rupert is at work, as normal. Ida is taking her lunchtime nap. They won't miss me until tea time, and by then..." "You'll be on a train westbound," Daisy finished for her. "I feel positively sick having to leave Philadelphia like this." Amy rubbed a hand across her abdomen. Daisy patted her hand. "Just think about your rancher at the other end, waiting for you." Amy's lips responded of their own accord. "You're right. The only thing that has kept me steady amidst all this is Ellis and his letters. How is it he makes me so happy, and I haven't yet met him?" "You will very soon. Now we'll handle things this end," Daisy nodded. Anderson offered a conciliatory smile. "I'll stall him for as long as I can, though you must expect Rupert to go for forfeiture of the guardianship as soon as he realizes what has happened. Try to have your rancher friend wait until after your birthday before you wed, and that will refute Rupert's claims that you were not of age." A little trickle of fear was like ice-cold water between her shoulder blades as she realized it wasn't yet all over. There was still a way to go before she was out of her uncle and aunt's clutches. No matter, she reminded herself that she now had some help. She was no longer all alone. And if Ellis Maddocks truly was the man that he portrayed himself to be in his letters, she'd never be alone again. She only hoped that he'd forgive her omission once the whole truth came out. Ellis had been as twitchy as a fox in a room full of hounds all day, but as the long, low whistle echoed down the valley, his mouth went suddenly dry. What if she wasn't all she said she was? What if they didn't have the same camaraderie when they met as they had in their letters? As the train rolled closer, the trail of smoke from the engine came into view, and his doubts grew. Townsfolk hurried to meet the incoming train, collecting passengers or stock. Ellis watched the hubbub carefully, looking for anyone who could be the person he'd conjured in his mind over the past few months, trying to picture her. When the crowds began to disperse and no one appeared to be at a loss, Ellis straightened up as thoughts afresh now plagued him. What if she'd missed the train? Or worse, had changed her mind? And then he saw her, dressed in a lovely lilac dress and navy coat that would be too heavy for the local climate, even now in the waning heat of the day. A small brown case sat at her feet, and she was looking about, her expression uncertain, and her fingers knotted together in front of her. He took a moment to gaze at the beautiful creature who had traveled so far, for him. He began to walk, and knew the instant that their eyes connected. He felt it in his gut, felt a slight change in him. She had dark hair and the deepest shade of blue eyes he'd ever seen. Her bottom lip that had been chewed on was released as she smiled at him, which was tentative at first. "Miss Talbot?" Ellis ventured, although he'd known it was her. Amy nodded, and he could see the relief in her expression. "You're here. Where else would I be? You're even more beautiful," he laughed self-deprecatingly. "Sorry, that probably isn't appropriate on first meeting someone." Amy's eyes roamed his face, as he had hers only moments before. "I'm not complaining. I started to get worried when you weren't in the crowd." Ellis reached her. She was slightly taller than he'd imagined. Her skin was flushed, her cheeks pink, and her eyes sparkled like the deepest mountain lake. "I'm afraid I fell asleep on the train," she said in a rush. "Luckily, one of the women in my carriage remembered I was destined for this stop, or I would have carried on going. I have been so excited and nervous to get here and to meet you," she trailed off. "Hello, Ellis." His head dipped in a small bow. "Hello, Amy. Let me take your bag. My wagon is just over here." He offered her an arm, and she slipped hers through his. He felt pride in that simple connection. He watched her gaze as it darted around, trying to take in the sights. "A little different to what you're used to." She smiled, her gaze dropping. "Sorry, it's just I've spent hours thinking about what the town would be like. Your letters didn't do it justice. It's so lovely and pretty, the way you can see the mountains in the background. Each store has its name up, just like in the city, only these are much smaller and spread out. I like it." Ellis stopped next to his wagon and stowed her case in the back. "It does us well. We have everything we could possibly need, or the store owners will source it and have it shipped in for us. It's been easier since the railway built the station here. Some folks lived here when it was just a swing station for the stagecoach." He held her arm as she stepped up and settled herself onto the bench. She shivered as the cold mountain air eddied about them, and he shook out the heavy woolen blanket that he had removed from the box under her seat. He used it to cover her, his gut clenching at the beautifully grateful smile she gave him. "Thank you. The air is crisp and lovely, but..." He patted the blanket in place around her. "You'll soon get used to it." "Will you teach me to ride? When will I meet Mitch and Nora?" The questions tripped over each other in her eagerness as he climbed up beside her. He laughed and took up the reins, clicking his tongue. "We'll do everything I said in my letters. Don't you worry about a thing." But she did worry. She'd been so frantic since leaving the city that her uncle would come barging into the carriage and drag her away from her future, that she hadn't slept a wink on the journey until sheer exhaustion had claimed her. Had it not been for the lovely woman sitting in the seat opposite, she may never have made it here. The town was indeed quaint, with horses tethered outside the storefronts and a corral full of untethered horses. Buggies lined the streets, and ladies strolled along the boardwalk with their parasols, though their dresses were not as fashionable as those in the big city. Amy had to remind herself that the town was as far from Philadelphian high society as she could get. Rupert and Ida would have no clue where she had disappeared to, though by now the jig would be up. It had taken only 3 days to cross the 2,000 miles, and still she felt uneasy that it wasn't far enough. That's the town church. We can see the preacher as soon as you're rested from your journey if you like. Ellis pointed to the charming, gray wooden building that was at the edge of the town, marked by a cross on the apex of the roof. The evergreens contrasted the color of the exterior, and Amy smiled. "It's so pretty. Yes, I'd like that, though." She remembered Anderson's advice. "Would you mind if we waited to get married until after my 18th birthday? I know that's a lot to ask, but—" She scrabbled around for a feasible excuse, but came up short as his unquestioning gaze fell on her. "I'm sure we can arrange that. It works a little better for me. Mitch and I have some work to do before the winter days start getting shorter." He bumped a shoulder to hers. "Don't look so worried, Amy. You can always ask me anything. Where will I stay in the meantime? It's a little unorthodox us being together alone like this now, and I don't want to give people the wrong impression. Nora and Mitch will act as chaperones for you. I've already spoken to them about it." Ellis flicked the reins, and the horse began to trot out of the township, carrying them towards her new life. Amy tried to relax, taking in the wondrous sights of the trees starting to change into their fall colors and the endless blue skies above them. Age-old mountains basked in the sunlight, their magnificent peaks grazing wispy clouds. Before long, the wagon pulled into a short driveway off the road. She could see the cabin, nestled in amongst trees, with several other outbuildings and a partially erected frame. "Welcome to my ranch," he murmured. "Barns, stables, and that part is where I'm building a small cabin for Mitch and Nora. That way, we can live as a proper husband and wife when you're ready." Amy gave him a sleepy smile, lulled by the rocking motion of the wagon. "It's truly beautiful, Ellis, more so than I could ever have imagined." He slipped down from the buggy and turned back for her. "I said the same thing myself. Look at you, utterly worn out. Come, let's get you inside. You need some food and then sleep." He slipped an arm under her legs and easily lifted her to his broad chest. Amy allowed herself to be carried across the yard, cocooned in the strong arms of Ellis, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she finally belonged. Chapter 8. To my best friend, Amy. Thank you for letting me know that you arrived safely. And I'm so pleased to hear that your fiancé is as delightful in real life as he was charming in his letters. It sounds as though your journey wasn't as arduous as I thought. Tell me more about Nora and Mitch, as they sound like lovely people. I'm sure that you are eager to hear news of Rupert's reaction to your disappearance. Well, I can reliably inform you that he was indeed furious. He arrived at our house looking for you and was his usual boorish self. Papa had to escort him out with a few choice words, and I can honestly say I've never heard such profanities uttered in this house. Mother took to her bed to recover. It was quite the drama, I can assure you. As we suspected, Rupert is challenging the original agreement, claiming you have abandoned the guardianship. He has been harassing Anderson and the firm to release the funds held within the trust with immediate effect. Fortunately for us, the senior partner is a curmudgeon and didn't take well to having Rupert shout at him. So, the saga continues. Anderson has asked me to remind you that once you're married, the trust will transfer to Ellis, and you will be free of Rupert and his duplicities for good. I can only hope that you are not jumping into the fire from the hot oil. All right, that takes care of the official business, so let's get down to the interesting dealings of gossip. Tell me more about your fiancé. And what about your dwelling? Is it positively divine, nestled in the trees? Or is it damp and full of wild animals and scary mountain men? As you can see, I am missing you terribly. When you write back, I shall tell you more of Anderson and of the divine creature he is turning out to be. Many blessings to you, dearest Amy. God bless. And stay well. Your best friend, Daisy. Amy's eyes drifted closed as she thought about her uncle ripping through the city searching for her. Humiliation over him barging into Daisy's darling parents' house burned her deeply, and she knew that her actions had caused ripples in the lives of people on the periphery of her life. Maybe she should have stayed put and married that dreadful bore instead of running away. But the thought of not seeing Ellis every morning over breakfast, as she had since the day she'd arrived, simply filled her with more dread. They had fallen into an easy routine, and Mitch and Nora appeared to deliberately avoid the kitchen area for 20 minutes or so each morning so that they could have the time alone. She would prepare porridge or eggs for him, and he would murmur his thanks, the warm look lingering on her before he took up his fork. On days when he would be out riding for longer, she would wrap bread and dried meat slices in a muslin cloth so that he would be able to eat while he was away from the homestead. It seemed that no matter which path she chose, someone was bound to end up caught in the crossfire. Tears burned the back of her eyes as Amy screwed Daisy's letter into a ball and threw it into the fire. She had been so wrapped up in her own thoughts that she hadn't heard Nora come up behind her. When Amy turned in response to her name being called out, she still wore a dark scowl upon her face. Nora's brows quirked and her eyes dropped to the flames licking over the paper. "Is everything okay?" she prompted. Amy hesitated, but her mind went blank when she tried to think of a valid and reasonable excuse. "Amy, what's wrong, sweetheart?" Nora's voice moved to concern, and she touched the younger woman's arm in a purely maternal way. Amy was used to barking voices and slaps, but the tenderness that echoed with her mother's touch just undid her. Her tears spilled over her lids, and she allowed Nora to guide her to the table. Taking the handkerchief she pressed into her hands, she blotted her eyes. She was grateful to Nora for giving her a moment to compose herself as Nora set the kettle on the stovetop and she got the utensils out to make them some tea. "Thank you," Amy murmured as the steaming mug was placed in front of her. "I'm sorry. I don't mean to be bothersome." Nora's gaze was quizzical as she took a seat on the chair opposite her. "Now, why on earth would you use that word? Of all the words you could have said, why would you think you were bothering me?" Amy's shoulder lifted slightly and dropped back down again as she stared morosely into the steam off her drink. She wasn't sure how to answer without sounding pathetic. "I think that's just how I see myself sometimes." Nora leaned back against the chair, the gnarled fingertip tapping the handle of her cup as she considered the young woman sitting opposite her. "That aunt and uncle of yours have a lot to answer for." Amy met the mildly annoyed stare with a startled look. "How do you?" "Ellis is a good boy, but he likes to hold things close to his chest. Mitch can hold a secret about as well as a bucket full of holes holds water." Nora's lips curved softly. "He told me everything that he knew about you, and I had to decipher the rest for myself." Amy huffed out a dry laugh when she thought of the old cowboy chatting as she would with Daisy over boned china cups in the drawing room back in Philadelphia. "That's better," Nora replied gently. "What was in the letter? I noticed that it had a Philadelphia postmark. Is it from back home?" "Yes, from my friend Daisy. The one you wrote to on the day after you got here when I took you and showed you around the town?" "Yes." Nora sipped at her drink and wrapped her hands around the cup to soak up the warmth it offered. "Was it bad news? Is that why you burned it?" Amy's gaze dropped as she realized that she didn't want to lie to the woman. She had been most welcoming and had shown her a kindness that Amy had forgotten could come from another person. None of it felt right, lying to Ellis by omission. She felt as if she'd had to continue to hide her true self here, even while he ignited a fire of emotions inside her, and that only compounded the feelings of sadness within. "They'll be home soon now the weather has turned," Nora remarked, as the silence dragged on. Amy looked anxiously at the window. The rainstorm had rolled in quickly, and the fat raindrops slapped against the glass as the wind whistled eerily through the eaves of the cabin. Inside, the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, filling the spacious room with wood smoke. Amy took the hint that she had to say something soon if she wanted to get it out while it was just the two of them in the room. "My uncle," she rolled her lips inward, hoping that she could trust the woman that watched her with kind eyes. She tried again. My parents left me a trust fund, a substantial one. My father named his brother as caretaker of the trust until I came of age, even though their relationship hadn't been amicable for years. I was 10 when I was orphaned. Her voice was dull as she began to tell the story, and her gaze remained out the windows, beyond the glass, on the misty trees, unseeing as she told Nora of the life she'd endured, the beatings and the cruel ways of her guardians, of how they'd plotted to take the trust fund from her. And so, Ellis was my way out, though I never planned on just how much I would care for him already. Her blue gaze was pulled back into the room, and she looked at Nora, surprised to see tears shining there that mirrored her own wet cheeks. She wiped at them with the handkerchief and offered it to Nora. The letter was from Daisy, telling me about the dreadful shenanigans my uncle has been up to trying to find out where I am. It made me sad that no matter the choice I made, someone I cared for would be involved in this. If I could hand the money back, I would in a heartbeat. If it meant some peace in my life, I would walk away, but Daisy always said that my parents desired to see me comfortable and that I owed it to them to fight for it. Nora reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It sounds like your good friend Daisy is a sensible woman, and your uncle doesn't deserve 1 cent more than he's already extorted from you. Annie swallowed a laugh, though she gave Nora a watery smile. I think you'd like Daisy and Anderson. I suppose I miss them. Her lower lip disappeared between her teeth. The thing is, I haven't told Ellis about the money. The moment just never seemed right, and now it would appear to be dishonest of me. Nora reached for her other hand and held them in hers. Look at me, Amy. None of this is your fault. It sounds like that money has been more of a hindrance than the wonderful gift your parents intended it to be. I understand your reluctance to tell Ellis. After all, how could you have been sure of his intentions had you told him in a letter? You would have always wondered if he had similar motives as the men you've met before. But how do I tell him now and not seem like I've been living a falsehood of my own? Nora tilted her head. You don't give him enough credit, Amy. He's a good man with an open heart. You tell him when you're good and ready, my dear. He'll be okay about it, you mark my words. She had no idea that love could be this way, or how it could make her feel so complete. 3 days after her 18th birthday, Amy recited the words in the little gray church in town, witnessed by Nora, Mitch, and several of the local people who knew Ellis and were slowly becoming acquainted with Amy. It was a strange feeling to be holding hands with the man who was now her husband, and while she felt so happy, the black shadow of her uncle was still looming at the corners of her mind. They stood in the churchyard, Amy wearing a dress of simple white, with her dark hair up in an intricate pile of curls on her head, woven with orange leaves and vines to bring a little of the remaining autumn inside. Being able to touch Ellis freely as only a wife could set off the butterflies, and he laughed when she told him this. And he told her that he hoped to be able to give her butterflies for the longest of times. Other than her name change, married life seemed no different from the one that they'd had before. Nora and Amy tended the home, prepared meals, and quilted as the days grew shorter. Ellis and Mitch were home more often as their work on the ranch began to slow down for winter. The trees denuded in the winds, and the leaves began to mulch underfoot or were nudged into piles in shop doorways in the little town by the fall winds blowing through the valley. Amy began to venture out on her own after being taught to harness a horse and drive the buggy by a laughing Ellis. For the first time in her life, was able to enjoy a true sense of freedom. Before long, she forgot about the drama that she had run away from. She was Amy Maddocks, a wife, a housekeeper, a friend, and a rancher. Women invited her to join their church group, and she could freely speak about the scriptures she'd read without fear of reprisal from her ridiculing uncle. For the first time in the longest of times, Amy felt truly happy. Chapter 9. The racket set up by the dogs in the dead of night had Amy's eyes popping open, but it was the urgency with which Ellis flew out of bed that made the fear spill ice into her blood. "Ellis, "What is it?" "Someone's in the yard," he muttered and opened the door to bellow Mitch's name. He grabbed a shirt and shoved his arms through the sleeves as he hurried down the stairs. The old man was already hopping through his bedroom door down the hallway as he pulled on his boots, letting forth a string of curse words that made Amy clap a hand to her ears. She followed her husband, calling out to him to wait, to be careful, though the words stalled in her mouth when she caught the dangerous gleam of the shotgun barrel in his hand as he opened the door and the pale moonlight spilled across the floor. "Stay here. Barricade the doors," Ellis told her sternly before he shouted, "Hurry, Mitch." And then he disappeared into the darkness. "Better hadn't be those rustlers that robbed Davis Point last month." Mitch ran out past her. She wrapped her arms around her middle, eyes straining into the black night, though she could only hear the dogs barking and then the thunder of hooves as the two men disappeared into the night. Nausea rolled around her gut when she realized that she was in the West. And things were done slightly differently here. Nora joined her at the open doorway, the cold night air snaking indolently around their bare feet, goose flesh across their skin. "Come on now, let's do as Ellis said and barricade this door." "What are rustlers?" Nora sighed as she slid a wooden bar across the door. "Thieves. They steal cattle, take them out of state. But we brand our stock? They can't resell what's marked as belonging to another ranch." Amy reasoned as she followed Nora into the kitchen. "They'll be after our yearlings, the ones we have yet to mark. There's a group of them that have been plaguing the state. They're good. The sheriff is yet to catch up with them. There's bounties on their heads, but..." She shrugged as she turned back from the stove. "It's too late when the cattle have already got a brand on. We can't prove that they came from our herd." Dawn had claimed the day by the time the two men returned. Without asking, Amy could see in Ellis's face that their suspicions had been right. Rustlers had taken the unmarked cattle and let the others out so that Ellis and Mitch had a time of it trying to recover those of the herd that had survived the night and the wild animals to be found and retrieved safely. "We can recover." Mitch's voice was more gravely than normal, and Amy suspected he was exhausted. "We've been through worse. Remember that winter of '80? Ellis stared at the table, his fingers drumming a tattoo as his arm hooked across the back of his chair. "It's going to take years. I was on track, and now..." His closed fist slammed down onto the table. "I don't have the money to just magic steers out of the air, Mitch. I had a plan." His sigh was deep and heartfelt. "I shall have to put a pause on your cabin. There just isn't the money in the pot to be able to finish it." Amy met Nora's look across the room and just knew that the older woman was wondering if she was going to let him know now about the fund. Maybe now was the time to reveal her secret. Still, she rolled her lips inwards. Nothing was certain yet. She hadn't had confirmation from the lawyers that the money had been safely moved out of the grasping hands of her family. Besides, money had always ruined things for her in the past. What would it do to the easy life that they had all forged here? She had been happy, really happy. If she was to reveal to her new husband that she kept something so monumental from him, how would he react? Would he behave in the same way as the men who'd come before him? Memories of the vicious words from her uncle danced through her mind, and the pain that came from seeing the greedy maniacal light in his eyes. Would Ellis become like him? "Don't you go worrying about a daft thing like that now," Nora told him. "We don't mind being here, though it isn't ideal for you both to have a marriage with a couple of old goats about the house. Right now, I'm not even sure I can afford to draw your pay off the ranch, Mitch, especially if I want to buy more stock and grow the herd," Ellis said dully, and he rose, his anguish pinching his face white. "I'm sorry, Mitch. Nora, you know how I love having you here, but I just can't keep you on." Amy divided her attention between the three of them. It seemed that the world that she'd known yesterday was disintegrating like dust in the rain. She wanted to help them all, to let them know that she could save the ranch, but could she take him looking at her so differently for lying to him? Did she really want the money at all, considering it had been like a huge weight about her neck for so long, and ever since she'd left it behind, her life had become so much easier? Indecision warred within as she carried the mugs of steaming coffee to the table and offered her husband a reassuring smile. His expression was carefully blank as he stalked past her and slammed his way out of the kitchen. Best give him space to process. Mitch cupped a hand around her shoulder and squeezed it. He can't see the woods for the trees. Don't you worry about a thing, it'll all work out. The old ranch hand followed his boss out the door, leaving the two women alone in the kitchen. Amy dragged a hand down her face. I could help, but I can't do anything until I know for certain that Anderson has been able to put a stop to my uncle's claim. I can't tell him now as it might fill him with false hope. I don't know what to do. Nora pressed to her feet and carried the coffee back to the pan, emptying the dark liquid from the cups. He's just in a panic right now. He had payments on the land to be met, and he can't purchase any stock until the spring sales. Surely you could buy stock from within the state, though? Nora lifted her hands. Sure, for the right price, and providing someone wants to sell. But you can't leave us. Where will you go? Nora fisted a hand on her hip. We aren't going anywhere. If I know my husband, I can guarantee that he's telling Ellis that very thing right now. Mitch loves that boy like he was one of our own. All we can do is let him settle down, get over his pride. He's probably more smarting over having let you down when you've only just got here. Amy swung a shocked look to the door and back. He can't help what's happened. I don't blame him, and I'm a lot tougher than I look. Nora crossed to her and pulled her into a hug. When Amy laid her cheek on Nora's shoulder, she was astonished to feel the moisture from her tears wetting Nora's shirt. I know you are, my dear. That's why he chose you. Mitch is good at calming a nervy horse, so let's just hope he can work the same wonders on a panicked rancher. Ellis found it hard to find joy in his work. Even though Mitch had insisted that Nora and he stay on at the ranch to help him for only the cost of a decent meal a day, Ellis still felt like he was taking advantage of the older couple. He was cross with himself for having taken his eye off the business, from routine tasks like looking after the boundary lines, because he'd become so enamored with his beautiful wife and had wanted to hurry home at the end of his working day, cutting the time short so that he could be back in her arms. A wife he'd now let down and made next to penniless when he'd assured her of a decent marriage. He'd made a vow to look after her, but how could he when the coffers were empty? Smells like snow, Mitch murmured, sniffing the air like a hunting dog. Soon be Christmas. Ellis grunted his response, acknowledging the truth in the ranch hand's statement. The words filled him with dread when last year he'd been hoping that his wishes would have been granted and he'd be able to enjoy a proper family celebration. He now had the wife he dreamt of, but he had nothing else to offer her. He would have to buy something as a gift for his new wife, but what could he give her, other than debt and a hard life? The horses turned back towards the ranch without the need for input from their riders. The gunmetal clouds had taken on the strange yellow hue that always came before a heavy snowfall. Since the theft, Ellis and Mitch had taken to checking the fence lines more regularly, although he no longer had the herd to use all the pastures he'd designated to cattle. His fences had been destroyed by stampeding cattle on the night the rustlers came, and it had taken a few weeks to mend them and take a proper head count of the stock that remained. Night after night, he'd sat at his desk and racked his brain trying to find a solution, a way to make some money and pull his ranch out of the red. He'd considered changing the farm to arable use, though he knew nothing about planting crops, and he was fairly certain that the land he owned wasn't suitable. The ranch house peeped through the trees as they rode down the hill, though Ellis didn't want to go home right now. He didn't want to see the sympathetic look from Amy or hear her words of encouragement, placating him that they would be all right. I need a few supplies, Ellis said, and reined away from the gate, turning his horse towards the road. What do you need? Mitch asked, but Ellis had already kicked his horse into a canter down the drive, mulling over the gloomy thoughts tumbling around in his mind. What kind of man couldn't provide for the woman to whom he has proposed marriage? Would she want to head back to Philadelphia? He gave his horse his head, and the animal flattened himself out over the terrain as they raced along the road. Ellis folded his body down low, tucking his head alongside the horse's neck as he thrilled in the freedom that the speed gave him. All too soon, he saw the town buildings pop up on the horizon, and he reluctantly straightened up, slowly pulling his horse back to a normal speed. He wasn't sure why he had told Mitch he was coming to town. He had no real need of anything right now, and no spare money with which to indulge. Still, he had to go back home with something, as Mitch would have known he was lying, and he didn't want to give the old ranch hand the satisfaction of grunting at him about being right. He trotted along Main Street to the general stores, hoping that something in there would catch his attention. As he swung his leg over and dropped to the ground, he turned when he heard his name being called from across the street. "Howdy, stranger." Theodore Linton, the post office master, waved him across the road and waited, his feet planted apart. "Thought that was you, Ellis. Looks like snow." Theodore nodded at the bloated sky. "Sure does." Ellis reached the deck where Theodore waited. "How's business?" "Better than you, I'd hazard a guess." "I heard what happened out at your place with the cattle. 80 head they took." Ellis's lips thinned into a straight line, and he gave a brisk nod. "Well, that pretty new wife of yours hasn't been by to collect her mail. Thought she might like something from her friend to cheer her up." Ellis lit up at the idea. "That's why I came by, to see if you had something for her." He followed the rotund man back into the post office and took off his hat as Theodore rolled around the edge of the wide countertop. "Something for you, too. Looks all official-like." Theodore wafted the package at him. Ellis frowned as he saw the Boston postmark and an unfamiliar crest stamped on the front. He tapped the envelope against his palm and deflected the curious questions from the postmaster. When he stepped outside once more, he ducked his head against the air that sliced through his leather coat as he ripped open the seal and unfolded the sheet inside. Confusion gave way to anger, so that by the time he'd swung back up into his saddle, he'd forgotten about his idea of taking a peace offering back to Amy. Instead, he just wanted answers from his wife. Chapter 10. The door slammed back into the frame, and the joy at having Ellis back home evaporated like water on a hot skillet as she took one look at his face. Dried berries and pine branches were littered across the table where she'd been making Christmas tree decorations with Nora, and the satin ribbons scattered to the floor as she stood. Her smile dropped, and she knew that something was terribly wrong. But before she could voice her thoughts, he flung the envelope at her. "Why am I getting a letter from a lawyer's firm in Boston?" He spread his hands, and she could feel the fury vibrating off him. "I've never even been to Boston." She collected the piece of paper up and recognized the emblem of Anderson's office, and she knew that she had made a mistake not telling him sooner. When she met his glittering gaze, she wanted to run and hide. "My family was from Boston. My father dealt with the law firm there, and Mr. Anderson is my representative in Philadelphia. Ellis, I've been trying to find a way to explain." "Go ahead," he interrupted, his voice sharp enough to make her wince. "Ellis," Nora stepped in between them, "give the girl a moment to explain herself. I think you'll like what she has to say." His heavy brows met in the middle as he turned to Nora. "Did you know about this?" Nora nodded. "Yes." Ellis whirled on Mitch, his voice climbing with incredulity. "Did you?" The old rancher shook his head and patted the air in front of him. "I have no idea what's going on, except that you're scaring the poor girl." "Poor?" Ellis roared. "Ha, she is not poor. Who are these people, and why do they want my details? What money do they need to wire to me?" Amy swallowed, and as her eyes drifted shut, her tears spilled over her lids and tracked down her cheeks. I should have told him sooner. She opened them once more and met the fury in her husband's face with a calm blue of a pool on a hot summer's day. "When my parents died, they left me money, a lot of money. The reason I was under the care of my aunt and uncle is that they were the guardians of my trust fund. They were trying to trick it off me by forcing me to marry the man I told you about in my letters." His fury edged away to something more painful, something that cracked her heart even more. "Disappointment. You lied to me. Amy wilted and pressed the heel of her hand to her chest to try and ease the ache. I needed to get the fund away from my uncle and… You used me? Did you trick me into marrying you just to get your hands on the money? Is that what this is? He whirled his arms to encompass the space. Of course not. I mean, maybe, in the beginning, it was a way out, but then Ellis can't be the man and pay the bills, but that's okay because his wife is rich, and you can just live off her instead. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? How it makes me feel? I know. I should have told you sooner, only it always changes things. I needed to be sure that I could stop my uncle from claiming before I said anything, and then it didn't seem to be the right time to tell you. I'm sorry. Get out of my sight, he snarled. I can't bear to look at you right now. I loved you, and you lied to me. How can I ever trust you? Amy stared at him for just a moment as pain filled her. With a sob, she turned and ran from the room. Ellis paced the floor, trying to shake off the temper that had built in him on the ride back from town. He didn't want to believe that everything between them had just been a facade, but it did explain why she had been so agreeable to marrying a lowly rancher like him, and why she had trekked halfway across the country. The whole thing had just been a ruse to fool him and get her hands on the money. As his temper banked, he stopped and looked to Nora and Mitch. Instead of sympathy and understanding, he found that they were both watching him with their arms folded and the same crumpled expressions of disbelief. Have you finished your little tantrum? Nora asked him. Ellis blinked in surprise. Pardon? Do you have any idea what the girl has been through to get here? The abuse that she suffered at the hands of people who are her so-called family? She slapped her hands on her thighs and stood up, shaking her head as Ellis stared at her dumbfounded. Abuse? Why didn't you tell me, Nora? She rolled her eyes and scoffed at him. Because it wasn't my story to tell, and I told her that you would be fine with the information. I found her in tears, just about cut up over the news that her good-for-nothing uncle was causing mayhem in her old life. And she wasn't sure if she was going to get the money, as the old coot was trying to get her on a legal loophole. That's why she had you wait until she was 18 before you got married, so that it would be yours. But I didn't know. She was looking for the right moment to tell you. But you haven't exactly been forthcoming with her since the robbery. Mitch tells me you've been sleeping on the sofa most nights, trying to avoid the poor girl. Now, Ellis, I love you like a son, so I can say this with some authority. Take your thick head out of the mud and look at what you've got in front of you. Then get your skinny backside back up those stairs and you grovel before that young girl. Grovel? I don't even want the money. Nora slapped a hand to her forehead and looked at her husband. I can't make this daft dolt understand. Maybe you can get it in his thick skull that she chose him, not the money. Mitch pursed his lips and acquiesced. She's right. As far as I can see, the girl wasn't sure that the money would be coming, and she didn't want to get your hopes up. She has spent her whole life having people fawn over her with one thing on their minds, to get their mitts on her fortune. She was sick of having it in her life, and she chose to ignore it, choosing a simple life here over a fancy one in Philadelphia. Nora jabbed at him with her finger. She was happy here with you. Was. The word was like a douse of freezing water over his head, and his angry tone came back at him. He'd said some dreadful things. He speared his fingers through his hair as his gaze swung between the two of them. She chose me. Yes, Nora shook her head on a chuckle. It's a wonder that they consider men capable of running the country when you can be as blind as a bat over certain things. Best go and say you're sorry. Mitch nodded towards the front of the stairs. How do I take the words back? I said some terrible things to her. She loves you, Nora stated in an obvious tone. She'd forgive you anything. When Ellis knocked on the door, Amy didn't move from where she was leaning against the window aperture, watching as the light slipped away towards night. She'd heard the murmuring of voices and wondered what had been decided. Though when the door opened, she was surprised to see Ellis instead of Nora standing there. She didn't try and hide her tear-stained face or her swollen red eyes from his avid gaze, though she did turn away from the pained expression that slid across his face when he saw her. Amy, he began, and paused when she raised a hand but didn't look at him. Instead, she spoke to the blurred reflection of him in the window pane. It seemed easier somehow. I tried to tell you about the trust fund many times, but it was never the right time, even more so after the cattle were taken. I wanted to tell you that help was coming, though part of me still didn't believe that Anderson could pull it off. When I first started writing to you, it was as a means to escape, though I hadn't imagined in my wildest dreams that we would fall in love, or that I could be this happy with my life. She heard the bed springs creak as the shadow in the window pane sat on the edge of the bed. Nora used the word abuse. Was he a cruel man? She gave a small nod, unwilling to have him pity her, but she knew that he deserved to know the whole truth. They both were. They seemed to enjoy it. When I discovered that they were planning to trick me out of my trust fund by getting me to marry David, part of me wanted to just run away. They could have the money, but Daisy was adamant that I wasn't to hand anything to them, she added in a small voice. When he spoke, his voice was louder, and she saw that the window shape had moved behind her. Daisy was right, and I should apologize, not just for my behavior tonight, though that in itself is unforgivable, but for how I've been since the robbery. You were right. We are husband and wife. We are in this together, and I shouldn't have tried to take on the burden of the ranch alone. I pushed Nora and Mitch away, and even worse, I pushed you away when all you tried to do was love me. Her skin delighted when she felt his hands tug on the material at the back of her dress. Her nerve endings zinged to life when she felt his hands slip around her waist, gently at first, as if he was testing the waters. I'm a stupid, proud man, Amy. I saw the letter and instantly went into selfish mode, as if you had deliberately used me or had the money sent to me in pity. What I should have done was sit you down and talk to you like a man. His arms encompassed her, and she felt his chest press against her back. He lowered his voice as he dipped his head to her ear. I'm so sorry, my darling. I promise I'll try harder next time. Slowly, imperceptibly, she felt herself relaxing into him until her head leaned on his shoulder and he started to nuzzle her neck. He wasn't perfect, but he could admit when he was wrong, and that showed her his courage. I'm sorry, too. I should have trusted you. It's hard to trust when you've been used as you have. We'll get through this, okay? We'll figure this all out between us. Amy turned in his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck. Here, in his arms, that's where she knew she belonged. Okay. He captured her mouth for a kiss, and she rejoiced in his embrace, knowing that the black shadow of deceit was no longer haunting her. Chapter 11. Where have you been? It's Christmas Eve. We have been waiting for you both, Amy asked with a laugh. Ellis stepped through the back door and stamped the snow off his boots. He removed his hat and shook the droplets of water from the ends of his shaggy hair. The small cabin was scented with meat roasting, smoky wood, and the sweet tang of berries and cinnamon that had been tied to the tree. Amy and Nora had laid boughs of pine along the mantel and then clustered some of it together with red ribbons, pinning it to the roof in small sections. In the corner, the fuzzy fat pine tree had ribbons and lines of beads threaded through it, with crocheted white dollies and stars dangling off the branch ends. Candles flickered around the room, their warm light dancing as the fire simmered. Wow, it looks lovely in here, Ellis exclaimed, sweeping her up for a hug. I had a little errand to sort out, that's all. Nora said that she saw you both riding towards the town earlier. Amy patted his shoulder and stepped away. We have some cocoa heating if you would like a cup. Mitch was in the window, his breath misting on the pane. Here he is, he said excitedly, and danced across to the front door, throwing it open, uncaring of the Arctic blast that slithered into the warm room. Nora skid and huffed, pausing in the doorway to see what had got her husband about as giddy as a fish in a whirlpool. What the? Amy, come and see this! Amy sent Ellis a puzzled look, and he blinked back with as much innocence as he could muster. What is going on? She could hear the voices, and when she stepped out onto the snowy decking, she recognized a few of the local ranch hands, with Theodore from the post office and his good wife, Hannah. But it was what they were sliding towards her that made her gasp. The large item was swaddled in oiled canvas, though she knew what it was from the shape alone. "Is that a piano? Where did you get it?" Theodore looked up from his supervisory role at the side, used his hand to shield against the glare of the sun on the white snow. "It belonged to the mayor's wife. When Ellis here came in last week and mentioned that he was in the market for one, I knew just the person to ask. The mayor says it hasn't been used since his wife passed away a few years ago. She loved to play, and he wanted it to go to a good home," Hannah said with a smile, as the piano was slid over the ground on a makeshift sleigh. Amy turned to her husband, a look of wonder on her face. "You did this for me?" Ellis smiled, his face crinkled as he nodded. "I remember what you said about your father loving your playing. I haven't played in so long." Amy replied softly, "I'm not sure I can remember how." Ellis curved an arm around her, watching as the men hefted the piano up the short steps and onto the platform. "Well, you have enough time to relearn, my love. A lifetime, in fact." He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she leaned into him. Soon enough, the piano had been unwrapped and rolled into the corner. With refreshments of warm cider and sweet rolls, the delivery team requested a musical show. Amy dragged over the leather-topped stool that Nora usually used as a footrest and lifted the lid. Stroking her fingers along the cool ivory keys felt so surreal. With the spicy sense of Christmas melding with the wood smoke, Amy was hit with a strong wave of nostalgia, going back to her childhood, where her father listened as she had concentrated on hitting the keynotes in the correct order. Amy smiled, the ache growing in her chest. "Hey." Ellis rubbed her back when she sat motionless in the seat. "Why are you crying?" Prosody. Amy lifted her blue gaze to him, and she smiled when she remembered the very words that her mother had said to her on Christmas Day, the last one that they'd had as a family. "These are happy tears. My father would be so happy right now." Ellis dropped a kiss on her crown. "I can make the others leave if you don't feel like playing right now." "No, no," Amy murmured, her fingertips spreading across the white and black of the piano keys. "No, I want to try, though I'm not sure how good I'll be after all these years." The first few chords were stiff and the timing was off. Amy paused, took a moment to steady herself, and closed her eyes. Her parents, laughing and happy, drifted through her mind as her father led her mother around the room in a jaunty dance to one of Amy's tunes. Laughing and happy as she was now, with Daisy, Ellis, and Nora, and Mitch. Her mouth curved slightly as her father's words drifted through her mind. "You are so talented, Amy. Don't ever stop playing." With her eyes closed, her fingers began to find the keys, and the melody filled the room. Amy, lost in memory, was oblivious to the people behind her. It was as if she had finally returned home, back to a place where she was free to be herself. As though she had been put back together once more, just in a slightly different way. Although she couldn't see her parents, she could feel the love in the room, feel it uniting the group. Nora's soulful voice joined in the last few keys, and as Amy played to the end, her eyes opened. Ellis was watching her intently, his face full of the love that shone from him. "That was beautiful, Amy," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "Where did you go?" She stood when he caught her by the hands and pulled her to him. "I think I realized for the first time in a long row of Christmases that this is the happiest I've been in what feels like forever. Thank you for the most amazing gift." "Ah, you two lovebirds. There's enough time for that," Nora wafted the air. "Play some more for us, Amy. I feel like celebrating this Christmas." And so Amy delighted in entertaining the group. Some danced, some joined in with the words. They all left by way of lamplight, warmed by the merriment of the day and by the cider and wine consumed by firelight. Long after they had retired for the night, Ellis and Amy reclined on the sofa, covered with a blanket. She had her head on his chest, gazing into the flames as they licked and crackled across the logs. The snowflakes tapped on the windowpane as they eddied in the wind outside. "It's snowing again," Ellis murmured, just as the clock chimed midnight. Amy, lethargic and content, patted her fingertips. "It's officially Christmas Day." "That it is, my love." Ellis caught her by the chin and leaned his head towards hers to kiss her. "Happy Christmas, my sweet Amy." "Happy Christmas, husband of mine," she whispered back. And they stayed where they were, as the snow softly lay its offering on the cabin, the trees, and the darkened land outside. Chapter 12. Happy Christmas, one and all. Theodore boomed as Amy opened the front door to him. She had to narrow her eyes. It was a clear, crisp winter's day, with the sun setting 1,000 diamonds free amongst the snow and the dripping barn roof. The trees wore their white snow-covered coats, setting off sparkles of their own. Thick layers of snow huddled along the window ledges, and all around her seemed fresh and new. Her cheeks were pink from the heat off the stove and the fire on which she had been cooking, and her dark hair had been tucked into a neat roll at the back of her head. She wiped her hands on her apron and smiled at the postmaster. Amy looked to the sleigh in the yard and to Hannah, who lifted a hand in greeting. "Happy Christmas, Theodore. Hannah, would you like to come in?" "No need, my dear. I'm just stopping by on our way to church. I come bearing gifts." Amy opened her mouth as her mind raced ahead to what she could possibly offer in return when Theodore held a cream-colored envelope out to her. "What's this?" she asked, and looked to Ellis, who came up behind her. He and Mitch had completed their jobs that morning, and the family was gathered together. "Ah," Theodore tapped his nose and winked. "You'll find out when you open it now, won't you?" "Hello, Ellis. I really enjoyed last night." Hannah suggested that we do something similar every year, maybe make it less impromptu next time. Ellis saw the envelope and gave Theodore a nod. "That was awfully good of you to run it out today, Theodore. I'm sure we can make it more of an event next year, too." Amy moved a puzzled gaze between them, studying the envelope, as Theodore and Ellis exchanged a few more words and bade goodbye. She waved at the retreating sleigh before turning the envelope over once more. "A Boston stamp mark," she said. "I know," Ellis smiled, closing the door. "Why don't you open it?" Amy tugged on the edges and frowned at the half-smile on her husband's face. "What did you do?" When she read the words, her eyes popped wide open as she stared at Ellis. "What did you do?" she repeated, this time her voice higher, more surprised. He chuckled, rubbed a hand around the back of his neck, and then he crossed to the table and resumed his seat. Amy saw the same 3 smug smiles looking back at her. "This says that the trust is in my name?" "That's right." He crossed his ankle over his knee. "That's what I instructed Anderson to do." Amy blinked at him. "But that was your money. When I married you, it became yours." Ellis shook his head. "It occurred to me that your father had intended it for you. Just because the law says it moves to your husband doesn't mean that you can't have it back." Amy's eyes moved down the form and back again. "But the ranch needs it. We can finish Nora and Mitch's house. We can replenish the herd. We can buy as many as you can handle. Maybe even take on another ranch hand in the spring." Mitch scratched at his chin. "Sounds like she's thought of everything, Ellis." Ellis shook his head. "It's her money. It didn't sit right with me, taking money from a man that I hadn't ever had the privilege of meeting. That was your father's life's earnings. He wanted it to go to you, Amy." Fresh tears stung her eyes as she gazed at her husband. "I don't think I will ever be able to love you any more than I do right now, Ellis." She walked to where he sat and threaded her fingers through his hair. "My father would have loved you because you make me very happy every day." "You make each other happy," Nora commented softly. "This is shaping up to be a wonderful, wonderful family Christmas." Ellis stood up, aligning himself with Amy's body, resting his hands on her hips. "I thought that if we took the money out of the equation, you would know truly that I choose you, not your wealth." "I know that," she whispered, "and I appreciate you more for saying that. But you are my family, you, Nora, and Mitch. You gave me a home and asked for nothing in return. You gave me everything I could ever want in a home and showed me how it was to be a family once more. This is my home. I want to buy us more cattle so that we can take the shadows out of your eyes, and so that you don't have to carry the burden of the upkeep alone. We are a team, Ellis. A family. You don't have to. I know that we can recover from the theft. It might take some time, but..." She laid a finger against his lips. "Let me do this for us, please." His lips moved against her skin as he smiled and nodded. "Good. I'd like to also think about maybe extending this place a little bit, you know." "Oh, here she goes," Mitch groaned on a chuckle. "Next thing, we'll be having fresh drapes and painting furniture." This time, it was Amy's turn to give a knowing smile. "Well, You'll be needing to paint a nursery at the very least, Mitchell." She counted 3 seconds of stunned silence before Ellis scooped her up in a giant bear hug and danced her about the room. "Ellis," Mitch cried out as he jumped to his feet. "Set the girl down. You'll be upsetting the little one." Nora clapped her hands together happily and made her way into the small circle of family. "Oh, Amy, you're going to make a wonderful mother." Amy opened her arms, linked Nora, then Mitch to Ellis, the four linked together. "And you're going to make a wonderful grandmother, Nora, the best there ever was. Next year, our Christmas will be even better, I reckon," Mitch said with a grin. Amy looked around her cabin in the woods, with the fluffy Christmas tree in the corner and the decorated roof. She looked into the happy, laughing faces of her family and nodded, her hand on the growing bump in her stomach. "I reckon you might just be right on that one, Mitch." The end.